Welcome to Let's Get It, the Atheist Roundtable.
That was terrible. Let's do that again.
Pass the mic, what you doing? What up with Eddie? Why he sweaty on your noodle? I don't get it. He lost his shit. The whole kid caboodle. Now pause. You pause. Everybody tell him that he's a lost cause. Who's the ass in the hat? Half Christian ass. Always talking this and talking that. And Benji on the epistemology. You got claims, got beliefs. What's your confidence? And is it relevant? Nah. Just Jeff. What's next? What text you gonna put to the test? Put to the test, little troll face weasel on TikTok looking like a beetle juice. And what do you do when a member of your crew sits in a shed with the dead? I don't know what's up. Anybody seen P Jump? Now the newest member of the crew. The TART debut. Here's your preview. It's K Nabs. She says she's the live stream queen. Welcome to the team. Yeah. Welcome to the team.
The Atheist Roundtable.
Is faith a reliable pathway to truth? Hey, yo, Oz, are we going on a deep dive?
Faith is bullshit. Jesus in the morning.
Jesus in the morning. Welcome to the Atheist Roundtable.
In the evening.
It's TART Live Debate Night. I am Oz. And
when Jesus is on a bagel, you can eat Jesus anytime.
Huh?
You know, pizza in the morning, pizza in the, whatever.
Okay. That was cool. Jeff, how are you?
Doing well.
Good. I'm excited. We've had this on the books here, I think about 3 weeks now, and I'm excited, looking forward to it. And I know the guys have been getting prepped and ready to go. But before we jump into action, I want everybody to know 2 shows coming up here. We have Dave Warnock coming on the 17th. Put that in your calendar. You want to be here for that. And then on the 23rd, Saturday, we have a 6-member panel discussion on who was Jesus historically. That one's going to be. We have some great people lined up for that one. But Jeff, anything you have going on, or anything you want to talk about before we bring the competitors on?
I will tease. I am working on some in-depth videos that will be premiering on the TART channel sometime soon, probably within the next few weeks. And then, of course, we have started our book club in the Discord. That has started this week. So on the 6th, we're going over chapter 1 of Dr. Josh's book. I actually don't have it by me. I got it. Never mind. Here it is. Did the Old Testament endorse slavery? Yeah, so we're reading chapter 1, and we're going to be talking with that as a group on the 6th in Discord. So if you got the book, you can still join or get the digital copy, whatever. It's on Kindle.
And I just talked to Josh. I think it was about 5 o'clock. Him and I spoke, and he was giving me some inside information on this new book that's coming out. And I'll just say it'll be another one that I think
another topic we can move on to.
Here the TART team will be another one of those where we go.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, without further ado, let's bring the competitors to the screen. Zach Randolph, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
This is a great way to start the new year for 2021.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. And when Randolph comes on, I feel a little more Canadian each time he comes on. So we appreciate you guys being here. Before we get into the format and topic and all that, I want to make sure you guys can introduce yourselves and shill away, plug away anything you have going on, and then we'll get down to business. So, Zach, we'll start with you. Tell us about yourself and where everybody can find you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Randolf, for choosing to debate against me. Should be a lot of fun. So my name's Zach. I have a YouTube channel called Adherent Apologetics. Basically, what we do, it's an apologetics channel. We're looking at Christian questions relating to philosophy or biblical studies, the Old Testament, New Testament, everything. It's so much fun. So if you want to hop on that, we have a podcast and a YouTube channel where you can listen to conversations with scholars who are a lot smarter than me, and we talk about these really important issues and hopefully all seek truth together as we try to figure out the nature of reality. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. And Randolph, tell us all about you.
Well, I am the founder of the organization here in Canada called Canadian Atheists. We're working to normalize atheism in society and to counter vilification efforts. That's a part of that. We're hoping that normalizing in society, not believing in deities, is going to catch on around the world. We want it to be accepted the same as someone who proclaims belief in a deity, so that we're not being ostracized anymore. And we are seeing improvement in that here in Canada and in some other countries, and we hope it's going to spread. People can reach me at canadianatheists.ca or read more about our organization there. And you can also find me on YouTube at www.youtube.com/Randolph Richardson. Remember, my name is spelled with an F, not PH. Thank you very much for having Zach and I on here to go over this topic.
Absolutely. Nope. Like I said, looking forward to it, and it's showtime. But so I'll go through the format so everybody's aware that's watching and listening tonight, and can play along. So hopefully everybody brought their popcorn and their favorite drink and ready to do it to it. So the format will be 10-minute openings, then 10-minute rebuttals. Then we'll have a 30-minute open conversation or dialogue, and then a 10-minute close. And then we'll go to Q&A with the viewers. The topic for the evening is everybody's favorite topic: does God exist?
Doesn't get more basic than that.
So I'm going to take the two ugly faces off screen, and I mean Jeff and I.
I need to be here.
I meant Jeff and I. Jeff and I. So I'm gonna take our faces off the screen, and you guys will be up. And then Zach, like I said, as soon as you start to speak, I'll have the clock ready to go, and we'll get the party started here.
Right. So thank you once again for hosting me and for Randolph. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm sure everyone's seen this before. You heard God debates, all kinds of different versions and models of God. So exciting. But today we're just starting with does God exist? I encourage everyone as you enter this debate, start as neutral as you can and kind of explore the different hypotheses we're going to discuss here. So just start off, I think it's helpful to talk about like just what do I mean by God? So from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, they say that conceptions of maximal greatness differ, but these believe that a maximally great reality must be a maximally great person or God. These largely agree that a maximally great person would be omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, and all good. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, a great place to start, and that's why I use this quote to understand what do I mean by God. And for this debate, I'm just arguing for a necessary, maximally great mind. So what I'm going to present is three arguments for the existence of God. The first being the necessary being explains why there's something rather than nothing. The second, the fine-tuning of the universe points to a designer. And third, events that occur if metaphysical naturalism, also known as atheism, were true occur, then therefore metaphysical naturalism, also known as atheism, is false. I understand there might be a lot of people listening that would say that atheism is just an absence of belief, including, I believe, Randolph, and I respect that. And if he wants to call himself an atheist, that's totally fine. I'm more interested in what he believes rather than the word and the terminology. But just for the sake of the debate, I'm going to be using, in my opening statement, atheism as the belief that there is no God. And I understand that there are many atheists who would disagree with that. First, The first argument I'm bringing forth is that there is a necessary being, also known as God. This argument that I'm using is developed by Alexandre. It's also from Leibniz. It's an argument from contingency. Premise 1 says that every contingent fact has an explanation. This is backed by the principle of sufficient reason. There's many different kinds, but what it says is that if contingent facts happen, there's explanations. A contingent fact would be something that could happen or not. It's just something that's possible. Say, my existence is contingent. I didn't have to exist, but I do exist. Premise 2 says there's a contingent fact that contains all other contingent facts. I think this premise can be backed by the idea of just imagine a big blob of everything. And in this big blob of everything, there is every fact, every contingent fact. So we can just kind of imagine this fact that contains all contingencies that exist in our world. And therefore, there'd be an explanation of this fact. Like I said before, contingent facts depend on other facts for explanations. So I think that this big blob of contingency would have some sort of explanation. This kind of goes to the heart of like the question of why is there something rather than nothing. This argument would argue that this explanation must involve a necessary being. What I mean here is not necessarily when we hear the word being, you may think I'm necessarily referring to a mind. For this argument, that's not the case. Many skeptics can and do stop at premise 4 and would agree that there is a necessary being, but their necessary being may be something like energy, or maybe like a quantum vacuum, or argue that there's this infinite regress and it's necessary. Any of that's fine. You can agree with premise 4 and say there's a necessary being. Where I get to God here is the fifth premise, which says that this necessary being is God. So the question is, how do we get to a necessary being? When we ask the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Why think it's God rather than like maybe the universe or energy or quantum fluctuations or all these other seeming options we have? And one argument that I'll briefly present here, but if we want to explore more as we further progress in this debate, is the argument from limits. Josh Rasmussen developed this in his book, How Reason Can Lead to God. And what he writes is that all limits alike have an outside explanation upon which they depend. Yet the basic features of the foundation, by contrast, lack an outside explanation. There are no contingencies in the necessary foundation of reality. Therefore, the basic features of the foundations have no limits. This is expressed in the problem of arbitrary limits. Let's say that there are 100 units of energy that exist as the foundation of reality, and from that springs everything that's come into existence. I think this argument gets at the heart of, let's say, well, why couldn't there be 101 or 99 or 98 or 102? It seems that all limits that we encounter are the product of other things. There's 100 milliliters of water in this water bottle. It's because I poured that amount and maybe drank some, so that's why there's that limit. So I think that with the foundation of reality, there is no limits. A limitless foundation would be omnipotent, since there is no limit on it, omniscient, because there is no limit, and personal, since it would be the foundation of all being and bring everything into existence. And as we go on to this debate, if Randolph wants to talk about any of that, I'm looking forward to it. But argument number 2 is that design points to a designer. I'm just going to use William Lane Craig's argument from fine tuning here. There's a bunch of different kinds. I also love Robin Collins, but for the sake of debate, this is probably the most simple. The fine tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. It's not due to physical necessity or chance. Therefore, it's due to design. So let's talk about this argument very briefly. First, the question is, why think there is fine tuning in the first place? These are just a couple examples taken from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy of Fine Tuning. This encyclopedia doesn't either atheist or atheist standards, written by theists and atheists, talking about all the different issues in philosophy. A great resource. And a couple examples of fine tuning. I think in philosophy, it's not really contested that there's fine tuning. The question would be, what does that mean, if anything? So a couple examples is, if the gravitational force had been absent or substantially weaker, galaxies and stars and planets would not have formed in the first place. Another example relating not to the constants, but the early conditions of the universe is low entropy. According to Alexandre, who's one of the most brilliant theists today, this is actually his favorite example of fine tuning. And it's really interesting to try to wrap your mind around it. But he says that the initial entropy of the universe must have been exceedingly low. According to Roger Penrose, who is, I believe, an atheist, he might be an agnostic, the low entropy resembling the one in which we live populate only 1 part in 10 to the 123rd of the available phase space volume. So a couple of examples of fine tuning. I believe if you talk to Luke Barnes, who's an astronomer, I think we have about 30 or 40 examples of fine tuning. So why I think the argument holds. Supporting premise 1, I'm just going with the explanations given that we have during, sorry, my apologies, the only potential explanations we have given the current data. If there's others, well, maybe there are, but we have to work on the evidence we have, not just theoretical conceivabilities. Premise 2, it says there's no reason to believe that that physical necessity explains the fine-tuning. I think a good reason to explain this is the principle of indifference. This is kind of developed in Bayesian theory, and it basically says that the principle of indifference states that in the absence of any relevant evidence, agents should distribute their credence or degrees of belief equally among all possible outcomes under consideration. It seems very easily conceivable that the constants could have been different. So in the absence of any other relevant evidence, we should accept that they definitely could have been. The idea of chance is extremely improbable. I'm sure if you listen to God Debate, you've heard someone say that there's a 1 in 10 zillion chance that this would happen by chance in terms of fine tuning. And I would hold to that as well. Not an exact number, just kind of referencing here. Third, we're talking about miracles, an argument from miracles. So premise 1 says if miracles happen, God exists. Premise 2, miracles happen. So premise 3 are the conclusion, God exists. And I'm defining a miracle as an event that would not occur if metaphysical naturalism is true. Why I think that miracles happen? So there's a couple different studies here, and I'll just hit on this very briefly because I only have about a couple minutes left. But one study done between 1982 and 1983 was a double-blind survey. Intercessors were chosen based on being born-again Christians, and as a result, hopefully you can read the slide. Fewer patients in the prayer group required ventilatory support, antibiotics, or diatrics. The study said that patients that were entered into the prayer group had less congestive heart failure, less diuretic and antibiotic therapy, and had fewer episodes of pneumonia, and fewer cardiac arrests, and were less frequently incubated and ventilated. My apologies. Another study, similar thing done in 2001, shows a similar result. And at that time, at admission, patients were randomized to receive prayer or not, compared with the prayer group, the usual care group with the prayer group. The prayer group had a lower mean of scores. They ended up being healthier. Remote and intercessory prayer was associated with lower course scores, which was good. It meant they were healthier coming out of care. This result suggests that prayer may be an effective adjunct to standard medical care. So all I'm trying to do with that argument is just say that what's these seemingly correlations between the success of prayer and statistical studies and just my apologies and just science with how this works. What's more likely? Under theism, you totally expect that the prayer group would have better health. Under atheism, the belief that there is no God, I understand if that's not what you hold, but I'm just using that for the course of this opening statement. You wouldn't expect there to be any difference because there would be no God. But there is a difference, which seems to me to make it the existence of God more probable. So to conclude, where are we now? I know I've just done a lot of information at you, and I apologize, but I've brought 3 positive arguments for God's existence, coming from there being a necessary being, fine-tuning, and miracles. Randolph does not have a burden of proof to show that God does not exist, but I did bring 3 arguments leading to the conclusion that God exists. So Randolph has a burden to show why these positive reasons fail. That's because if these arguments hold, God exists. So Randolph has to show why these reasons fail. He doesn't have to prove that God doesn't exist. He just has to show why my reasons for leading to the existence of God fail. Because if these arguments fail, we're left at best at being an agnostic unless Randolph provides positive arguments for atheism. Once again, here I'm referring to atheism by its traditional definition of belief that there is no gods. Thank you so much for your time for this opening statement. Really pumped to see what Randolph has. So thank you.
That was an interesting interlude. First thing I'm going to start with is a quick objection here. That is not the traditional definition of atheism. That is an anti-theistic point of view. The traditional, if you want to get into traditional, we need to look at the etymology, which does not support that. So it is just an absence of belief in deities. But I'm not going to go into great depth on that. And that's fine. I do appreciate that you're recognizing where the burden, the onus of justification or burden of proof lies. I think that's fair and honest of you, and I thank you for that. It makes things a lot easier for both of us. So I don't really have much of an opening statement prepared. I don't normally prepare them for these things. But I will talk about a couple of things. I will try to kind of address your points, and that'll serve as my opening statement, I think. You talked about a number of different points, and I did make some notes. So I think I'll start with kind of an overall thing. Everything that you're talking about seems to point to an idea of a singular God, not multiple gods and goddesses working together as teams to make things work. And one thing I'll be very interested to know is, from your point of view, how you justify favoring the idea of a single deity over multiple deities for life, the universe, and everything, so to speak. Because I think that'll be an important thing to cover. I'll just quickly go through some of the other things, and then we can, I guess, go back and forth. There is the necessary being to explain something rather than nothing. And I think what we should probably do is get into what you think the characteristics of absolutely nothing are, if you think there are any such characteristics. I take the position that for absolutely nothing to be absolutely nothing, that would not necessitate anything in particular, including laws of physics, laws of logic, and different things like that. And so it would not be, perhaps it would not be impossible for the whole entire cosmos to erupt from absolutely nothing, since that would also mean that there may not be any constraints. The big challenge we have with absolutely nothing is that, as far as I'm aware, scientists have not had absolutely nothing to experiment with and to poke and prod at and to figure out. And there are people who would argue that that's the same for deity. Nobody's been able to actually have a deity to interact with and test these things out. So that, I think, will lead to some interesting conversation. There's a necessity to explain something rather than nothing. So there we go. The fine-tuning argument, I don't see any credibility in that one, because when I take a look at how much of the universe is not hospitable to life, and a number you threw out there was 10 to the power of 123 of the available phase space volume. We're tiny as far as the size of the entire cosmos, let alone the size of our universe goes, that we are aware of so far. We really don't know how big it actually is. There are some people making guesses, but if we just consider the size that we've been able to detect so far, we wouldn't even compare as a grain of sand on the beach, by my estimation. And so if this was a fine-tuned universe, then why is the vast majority of it not hospitable to life? I think that's a big problem for the fine-tuning argument. Events wouldn't occur without God is another claim that's made. And this, I think, is a presumption that there's a deity that controls everything. And I would like to see some evidence of that. I'm stuck with not seeing kind of any evidence for that. I do have criteria for what would prove to me that a deity is real, that such a deity is real, but I'm not there. You pointed out that all limits have an outside explanation. I would be very interested if you could elaborate a little more on that. It would be maybe with an example of some limits, like, I guess, if you're considering the laws of logic to be one such limit, or the laws of physics to be another such limit. So if you wanted to kind of explain why this doesn't just occur naturally, and that this is something that is somehow prescribed and proscribed in tandem there by some outside explanation, I'd be very interested in that. And I'm assuming by outside explanation, you mean outside of the cosmos. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but a limitless foundation would be omnipotent, omniscient, and personal. I find this interesting, and I would like to explore this more with you. And design points to a designer from William Lane Craig. Now, William Lane Craig is well respected in theistic circles, in particular as a philosopher, and he has studied philosophy. He knows it well, and he does make many great arguments. He's also a big proponent of the Kalam cosmological argument, which I reject right from the first premise, because I find that it's lacking. You pointed out physical necessity or chance is what the universe is due to, and then the next part of it says, oh, it is not due to physical necessity or chance, so therefore it is due to design. I think that argument is missing some things. I think that it needs more information is needed before that conclusion can actually be supported, because it looks like that's just an assumption. The final one that you pointed out, miracles happen. If miracles happen, God exists. And to me, that seems to indicate that you're referring to miracles that are caused by God. And since the nature of miracles, as they're commonly defined, are dependent on a deity, such as the Christian God, I think I can accept that because it is conditional and hypothetical. So the next premise, number 2, miracles happen. Where's the evidence? So miracles happen needs explanation, needs validation. So that's where we're at. I hope this can serve okay as my opening statement. One last point I will make here is a question from it. If people were made in God's image, and if God is perfect, then why are people imperfect? Thank you very much.
All right, Jeffy Jeff, just so you know, you're muted. I got your back, dog. I got your back. So round one, how you feeling?
I think it was really good. I think this is probably one of the best openings that we've had. We got PowerPoints going on. I mean, we got very well thought out statements. I can't say I agree with everything, but it's a very good start. I look forward to see where this progresses, especially some of the claims that were made. And I think Randolph makes a good point about the miracles thing. And I know, I think a lot of times it's easy to throw in, like if something happens that's unexplained, to just throw it in as a miracle. But I know specifically with the medical stuff, and I'm sure Randolph might get into that too. Some studies have been out there that if you don't know you're being prayed for, a lot of times you don't get those same effects. So, I would like to see some real evidence of miracles, whatever he's got.
Yeah, and a completely shameless plug, but on the Ozone show today, we talked about this, the prayer, some of the placebo effect,
yeah,
and the lack of evidence that prayer works in a supernatural sense.
Sure.
So we do need to have evidence to back that up. But it's think
interesting too, because I know you've come from faith to no faith, just like I've come from faith to no faith. And for me, I don't know about you, but one of the things that I missed the most was prayer in the way that it worked. And I had to find a substitution for that. And my substitution was meditation. And I now get better effects of that, whatever mental alchemy is going on there, from meditation and mindfulness and being able to control my mind. So I think that prayer does have positive effects on the individual. I just don't think that it's coming from an outside source. It's something you're doing internally.
Correct, which is, and kudos to Zach. It's not very often we get to have somebody that comes prepared, with a PowerPoint and notes and all that. And I say that with all respect. I genuinely mean that it means a lot to me that he, one, respects his own argument, but even respects our platform enough to come, prepared and ready to go. Absolutely. So we appreciate that, Zach. Thank you very much. I think it's time to get back to it. So the next part of the argument will be the 10-minute rebuttals. So we will treat it the same way we did. We'll bring them back on screen, and as soon as Zach starts to speak, I will hit the stopwatch. So round 2, let's get it.
Zach, you're muted.
Alrighty, thank you. So I'll get started now. This probably won't take 10 minutes, but I'll hopefully get through everything that Randolph talked about his opening statement and a little bit of what you guys showed in that kind of cool little interlude thing. Never seen that before.
That was interesting. Never had that before.
All right, I will start now with my first rebuttal, and if you want to start the timer, that works. So let's just start with this. I don't really want to talk about the definition of atheism for a while. I would say I would disagree with Randolph that it's, on my opinion, it's not the traditional definition. It was really only until Antony Flew in the 1970s that atheism was defined as an absence of belief. But it's not really relevant for me to debate it at this point. It's just kind of like whatever.
It's off topic.
With all respect to it. And if it's my opening my rebuttal, so please respect just my time here. All right, so let's get into a little bit of what he says. First, I want to cover his objections to my arguments, and then we'll talk about the just kind of like more general things. First, he talks about the idea that we just don't know the characteristics of an absolute nothing. And we just can't experiment on it. And from that, we really just can't know. Maybe the universe could come from nothing. I don't know if that's what he's inferring, but I'm sure he can clarify. But I would talk about what I mean by nothing. It's kind of irrelevant to this debate because I'm not arguing that the universe began to exist. I think we could have an infinite regress, and we could run my argument that I'm bringing from Alexandre Proust here. So I think it's kind of irrelevant to this debate. But in terms of nothing, I can talk about a metaphysical nothing, literally nothing. Nothing is the absence of everything. You can say maybe abstract objects technically exist. That's fine. If the universe came from nothing, it would still be a contingent thing. We still have a necessary being. That's the heart of the argument, the cosmological argument, is we're talking about, like, what is this necessary being? If your necessary being is nothing, okay, that's fine if that's what you believe, but let's talk about this necessary being. The next thing I talk about is the argument from limits. How do we get from necessary being to God? He says, what limits am I talking about? That's a great clarifying question. I really appreciate that, Randolph, because I think it really helps understand the heart of this argument. So the argument against arbitrary limits for the foundation is talking about exactly arbitrary limits. I believe it's Josh Rasmussen that's developed an argument from limits. And when we're talking about an arbitrary limit, we're talking about something with a number of atoms or particles or superstrings, something that you could almost like quantitatively count. We're not talking about like the laws of logic. I would say that everything obeys the laws of logic, and that's not any arbitrary limit because there's no like set quantity to the laws of logic. Like they're not like 100 units or whatever. When I'm talking about the foundation, it's specifically arguing against maybe like, let's say energy is the necessary foundation. I brought this up earlier. And let's just say there's 100 units of energy that have just always existed. Well, why have they? It seems like an arbitrary limit. So I hope that kind of clarifies what I'm talking about from there. I think that was it for the first argument. So I didn't see a specific premise he was disagreeing with. But we can talk about that more as we keep on going. With fine-tuning, he brings up the idea that the universe is not hospitable to life. And he brings this as an objection to fine-tuning. So there's a lot that could be said here. But the examples I brought up from fine-tuning were specific for a certain reason. They're not talking about whether life can occur in planets. We're talking about whether there'd be planets or galaxies or anything in the first place. I brought up the gravitational constant. And what I talked about is that if gravity had been absent or weaker, galaxies and stars and planets would have not formed in the first place. If they're stronger, a very similar thing would happen. So with this constant, it's not about a specific form of life or anything like that. And with low entropy, it's a really weird thing to get your mind around. So I understand, but I think Randolph misunderstands the low entropy. It's talking about in the early universe. We're talking about right after the Big Bang, and it's talking about the initial entropy of the universe being very low. If the entropy was different, if it was if it populated a larger volume, we'd have a universe that just expands and nothing forms. So I hope that kind of helps clarify that. He says the fine-tuning argument is missing something. I'm not exactly sure what that was. I might be missing something actually out of his opening statement there because I wrote it down and then I don't know what he's referring to when he's saying he's missing something. I think he's talking about William Lane Craig and the argument, and it's just like only these three options. Okay, well that's fine, but I'm just going off of what we have in terms of like the data and what people have said. If Randolph wants to bring another hypothesis to explain fine-tuning, that's fine. We can talk about that. The argument for miracles. There was lots of fun stuff here. He says, where's the evidence needs validation? I would say that these studies that I brought up were peer-reviewed in medical journals. These aren't just things that were popped up off the streets, and both of them brought forth results where the group that was prayed for had better health results than the group that was not prayed for. In one study done in 2001, it was 67% in good health, 19% in bad health, compared to 64 and 21. And in the study done in 1988, it said that 163 people were in good health after the study and 27 in bad health if they were prayed for. In terms of the control group, the group not prayed for, 147 were prayed for and 44 were not prayed for. I also noticed in your guys' awesome little like middle thing, I think it was Jeff brought up the point, not necessarily responding to Randolph here, but Jeff brought up this objection, which is really good. And it's good to clarify. These are double-blind studies. These people who were prayed for, they didn't know whether they're being prayed for or not. So I do think that gets around Jeff's objection there in both of these studies, because these are double-blind studies. A very simple definition is a double-blind study is one which neither the participants nor the experimenters know who's receiving a particular treatment. So I appreciate Jeff's kind of like response there, and I hope that clarifies that, because it's a really insightful point that Jeff brings up, and I think that I hopefully clarified it, that these were double-blind studies. Let's see, what else do we got here? Where's the evidence? I brought up the evidence. Now, some of his general objections. Why just one God? This is a really good question that I didn't bring up before. A couple reasons to think that it's just one necessary foundation. First, Occam's razor. Why don't multiply causes beyond necessities? Why posit there's two limited beings when one perfect being will do? It seems like a simpler and better explanation than just having these limited beings that just exist. Bringing forth the argument from limits and just Occam's razor here. Also, my friend Kyle Alexandre, who on the Christian Idealism YouTube channel, I ran this idea past him in preparation for this debate, and we talked about, I argue God being absolute perfection. And what that means is being perfect means having power over everything else. But a perfect being can't have power over a perfect being. So neither one is maximally perfect. If we have multiple gods, what we have is two limited beings, which would go against the argument from limits, which I think bridges us from the necessary foundation to God. If God is perfect, why aren't we perfect? That's a great question. I would say this isn't relevant to this debate. I do have a little bit of time left, though, so I'll be sure to just talk about, I think that one day as Christians, we have this belief that we are going to become perfect. This life is kind of like, gives us the ability to understand what's going on here. God gives us free will to kind of choose to believe in him, because it seems like being forced to believe in him wouldn't have the same value as choosing to believe in him. I would say, though, I'd kind of like to explore the arguments in the rest of this time, just because this isn't really relevant to this debate. It's just kind of like an interesting question. So I appreciate your question. And I think that's it. So I appreciate everything. As far as I know, should be a lot of fun. And yeah, I'll see the last couple minutes of my time, and I look forward to Randolph's rebuttal. So thank you.
Thank you, Zach. I guess Tart's asleep at the switch at the moment, so we'll just move on into to my responses here. Oh, there he is.
I'm sorry, I put it in a private chat. You, as soon as he was done, I'm stopping the clock, and Randolph, as soon as you start, I'm hitting the clock.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was making a few notes here while without watching the chat. So.
Nope, I completely understand. Go, no it's all you.
Okay, thank you very much, Zach. The idea that nothing is the absence of everything is, I think, correct. And that's why everything would include things like laws of logic, laws of physics, and other kind of natural things that we notice. And so when you're saying that something can't come from nothing, that seems to me to be a rule that would therefore render absolutely nothing not absolutely nothing anymore. And I'm curious, how or why does this justify a being in existence, such as your God? So let's see, fine-tuning. You mentioned you're referring to one Big Bang. And my understanding is that Stephen Hawking and Penrose had both worked together to update the scientific theory of the Big Bang to include multiple Big Bangs, and because of quantum physics. And so, and I'm not talking about multiverse theory, which comes up an awful lot in response to this, but rather multiple Big Bangs creating our current universe. And imagine with a single Big Bang, perhaps our universe would be the shape of an oblate spheroid or a perfect sphere as a result of that. That would seem to make sense with the laws of physics, laws of logic, and whatnot. Just seems to fit. But if there's multiple Big Bangs, perhaps our universe would be more like the shape of a lumpy potato. So the idea is interesting. And if people are saying, well, there can only be one first, I have to cast a shadow of doubt on that as well, because I can't think of anything that would possibly rule out the possibility of two or more of these Big Bangs occurring simultaneously at the very beginning and throughout. There could be multiple happening in tandem later on. They may not even be related and could still happen at the same time. I'm not aware of something that could make that an impossibility. So that's something I think makes it worthy of consideration to say, okay, maybe there are multiple bangs. There's the idea of the fine-tuning. I do think that you're possibly shifting a little bit, because the fine-tuning argument, as I've been aware of it all this time, has been to justify why there's life in the universe. And you seem to be addressing it in a different way, as in why there's a universe. So that's an interesting new kind of perspective on this. And so I'm wondering if maybe there's a different name for this argument, perhaps, or if there's something that I've missed in the past on this. So you're talking about going off known options, basing on known options from William Lane Craig's arguments. Why is that a suitable limit? Just because we are aware of certain options is actually, in my view, a human limitation. What we know is what we've been able to find out so far with our own scientific endeavors and whatnot, and philosophical questioning, and on it goes. That, just because we've thought of a lot of things, doesn't necessarily mean we've thought of everything. There could be a lot of other possibilities that we have not considered yet and are yet to be discovered. So I don't want to take the risk of limiting my options to only what's known, unless there's some way that I can absolutely rule out other explanations. And I think that's part of where William Lane Craig's argument falls apart. Intercessory prayer studies, as I understand it, the early ones have been debunked, and there was a much larger one done with much greater statistical significance. It's on PubMed. I'll just put the link into the private chat so that people can look at that in the, hopefully the moderators can include that into the public live chat. It's a PubMed article that talks about intercessory prayer, and they're finding it to be pretty neutral, as I understand it. They're seeing numbers about 50% in there, and they were finding that there wasn't really too much change. But one interesting thing, as I recall, and it's been a while since I've read it, but one interesting thing I recall from it was that people who thought there were people praying for them, there was a slightly higher number of problems that continued and complications that arose out of it. But they're thinking that I believe they're thinking that matches a margin of error. So it still, in the end, looks neutral once you discount that. But the double blind point is very good. That's a very important one. Why just one God? Occam's razor is definitely an important tool for this. If one being has to handle everything, that doesn't necessarily mean things are simpler. That means that one being has to know more, has to have a more complex set of thought processes and a greater degree of understanding of things. So a greater education and whatnot. So it's, I'm not so sure that Occam's razor actually gives you the answer there. It actually favors you there. With multiple deities, you could, I guess in theory, have some deities who specialize in planet construction and another deities who specialize in star construction and different things like that, and another group of deities that decides where the different galaxies go so that there are fewer collisions. And so hopefully there aren't any. Now we're seeing, it looks like there are going to be some collisions between galaxies, which are very likely going to be very bad for any life on any solar systems within these galaxies. So this, to me, does not look like a perfect design. You mentioned that being perfect means having power over everything else. You made the argument that multiple gods can't do that. That sounds to me like a presumption that multiple deities would not be able to get along. It's as if there's a presumption of some competitive nature there. I don't see why a team of deities who all know the same things, who are all, say, omniscient, wouldn't be able to work together. So I find that argument precarious. And my final question to you is, why is perfection necessary? Thank you very much.
Jeffy Jeff.
What's up?
Into round two. So before we give kind of review there, I wanted to hit a couple of the comments here. But first and foremost, Cooper Gates, $5 super chat, and was asking a question about Zach or for Zach, and I'll screen capture that and save it for the end. We are going to have a Q&A. But I want to make sure we recognize your super chat. Thank you very much for that. And like I said, we'll come back around to that at the end. So I didn't want you to think we're ignoring you at all. But a couple things real quick. Zach and Randolph's info. Any place you want to find them, anything you need to know about them is going to be in the description. Zach's YouTube page, and Randolph has a link and everything in there. You can check them out there. And we want to go through some of the chat here and make sure we're giving the proper kudos, because we got a lot of people hanging out tonight. And I'm not going to get to everybody, but if I don't, I apologize. But CH15, Adam, Christina Taft, Samuel Doolittle, Cooper Gates, Enigma, Josh, Geo Sam, Titan
in there.
Oh, Titan, your anus is here. Let's see, anybody else? Was Joshua Phillips. Lots of new names.
I saw Captain Dadpool in there too.
The legend Biff Saunders is actually hanging out. Captain Dadpool, the homie. Let's see. Yeah, for the sake of time, I'm not going to keep scrolling too much further up. Geo Sam. Ian, as always, Eddie Krum de la Crum with us, hanging out. Thank you guys so much for being in the chat. And now's probably the time you keep listening to us. Refill your popcorn, refill your drink. But round two, Jeff, give me your review.
I mean, Randolph's going to have me convinced of polytheism here shortly. But it's an interesting concept because, I think if I remain neutral, I'm not an anti-theist. I don't necessarily believe there is no God. And I think there are some good arguments for an ultimate being that is necessity. But yeah, I've never really thought about the single versus multiple and why multiple might or might not make more sense than a singular. So that's an interesting thing for me to ponder upon. And then I appreciate Zach taking the time to clarify about the double-blind studies. That's definitely something that we should look into and we should question, just as he has. So I appreciate him, even though this is not my debate. I want to make sure I'm not saying things that you're responding to. But yeah, I think it's a good question to answer. So
yeah, and well, Jeff, you and I do try, or at least try to do a good job of keeping it neutral. But if one side, just like the last debate, like the theist at the end of the day end up slapping around the atheist.
Yeah, I don't like it. I have to. I know. I'm joking. For those, everybody said I was being too mean to Eddie. We know Eddie. Eddie's friends of ours. We can just with Eddie. He knows.
Yeah, and we said it. The theist slapped the atheist round at the end of it. And the one thing about debates is we don't necessarily have to agree with the argument or agree with the point. It is who best who best presents their argument. Who put it together. And who made the most convincing argument for their case. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but who was most convincing. And even like the last debate, the Christian definitely won, and we have no problem saying that here on this channel. So, but there's one I wanted to pull up here, and then we're going to transition so the guys get back into it. So going to go for it. Tart, what's up with these interruptions? It's highly annoying and messes with the flow of the debate. First of all, thank you for your honest feedback. Seriously, we do value that. What we found is some people do appreciate it because it gives them a chance to, if they want to use the restroom, get something to drink. Kind of breaks up the just an hour and a half, 2 hours of straight conversation, and it gives the two people that are debating a chance to get a drink of water, get up and stretch, do whatever they want to do, and then refocus. So that's why we do it. But Jeff, let's get back to it and not wasting anybody else.
We don't want to waste his time.
Because this shit sucks. So Randolph and Zach, we'll bring you guys back on, and as soon as you guys start talking, I will hit the clock. They have 40 minutes of open dialogue. Let's do this thing.
Hey, did you stretch?
Sorry, I'm unmuted.
Did you stretch?
I disagree with the chatter. I really do enjoy the breaks. It's actually good to kind of get everything together.
Yeah,
But
it gives you a chance to think
good to
about
finally be able to interact with you. It's been a minute.
I thought the previous period was that. I didn't mean to interrupt you earlier, so that's okay. Yeah.
No, you're all good. It happens. All right, so we got 40 minutes. I feel like so it'd be most helpful, I think, for everyone. Let's just walk through these three arguments, because we threw a lot of stuff out there, and I'd be curious because you threw a lot of things out there, but I'm still kind of missing like some of your necessary objections. We could kind of talk about that if that sounds good to you.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So, the first argument I brought forth is Proust's argument from contingency that there's a necessary being, and this necessary being would be God. You brought the idea like maybe there's multiple gods or a few different things, but it seemed like to me you'd accept everything up to premise 4, and you deny that the necessary being is necessarily God. So like, where do you disagree with the argument? And I can reread it if you
Well, I made some notes. So you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like your a necessary being explains why there's something rather than nothing, right?
Necessary being would explain contingent facts, I think, is a better way of doing it. And I guess that's the age-old question of why is there something rather than nothing. Yeah,
so your first premise that every contingent fact has an explanation. Can you tell me what you mean by contingent fact?
Sure. That's a great question. So I think the most simple definition of a contingent fact is something that could happen or not. It's merely possible. Like I'd say, for example, like my own existence is a contingent fact. It was possible that there's a world where I don't exist. So I'd say I'm contingent because I depend on something else. It's possible that I may not exist. And I'd argue that every contingent fact would have an explanation for its existence. So I have an explanation coming from my parents.
So you're not dealing just with facts that are valid. You're dealing with something that there's a possibility of it.
Right. I mean, you're
dealing with hypothetical in a way.
Well, contingent facts they're things in reality that could happen or they could have not happened. They're just they're mere possibilities.
I guess these are things that you would consider to be a normal thing to expect to happen then.
No, I would say, like, once again here, contingent facts are things that maybe could have happened or they could have not. Take, for example, like I brought forth like my existence, or maybe like this AirPods case. Does this case exist out of like necessity? I would say no, and I think you would agree with me. It depends on something else. It could have just not existed. It depends on an outside explanation for its existence being a contingent fact.
Okay, so yeah, I'm just trying to understand because the term contingent fact is a new one to me. It seems like would you say that every fact has an explanation at least?
No, I would say every contingent fact has an explanation. Necessary facts don't have outside explanations because they're necessary. So every contingent fact has an explanation.
Okay, so in a way, you're dealing with a hypothetical here as well.
No, I wouldn't say it's hypothetically true. I'd say it's true. It's this thing in philosophy called the principle of sufficient reason. There's so many different versions of it, but I can use a very weak version of it, which just says that every contingent fact has an explanation. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm wrestling with what contingent fact means. It's still not very clear to me. I'm just going to take a quick look and see if I can find something that describes it. I'm not dissatisfied with you or anything. I'm just trying to make sense of this concept myself. I'm seeing, okay, in philosophy and logic, contingency is the status of propositions that are neither true under every possible evaluation, nor false under every possible valuation. A contingent proposition is neither necessarily true nor necessarily false.
Right, exactly. So I can clarify here. Do I exist in every possible world? I would say no. There's possible worlds where I don't exist. And then I think it's another way of deducing like what's contingent versus what's necessary. Is like my own existence doesn't have to exist. There's possible worlds where I don't exist. So I'd be contingent. We could draw that to many different other things.
So the concept of contingency seems reasonable to me, but calling it a fact seems to me, when those words are put together, it feels like it's narrowing things down to say, okay, these are actual facts we're dealing with. Not just possibilities. So it's a bit confusing, the term. Perhaps you can give me an example, if you don't mind, of something that would qualify as contingent fact that doesn't have an explanation, or you're saying every contingent fact has an explanation.
Yeah, I mean, I can read the argument for you again, but premise one is every contingent fact has an explanation.
Yeah, I've got that in my notes here, and so I'm having problems accepting that because of that term contingent fact, and that's a tough one, because from what you're saying to me, it seems hypothetical, but you're saying it's not. So that's why.
I'd say it's in reality. Every contingent fact has an explanation, and I think we can back that by reason. I think it's a fundamental part of scientific inquiry. When we're looking into, like, say something like, why did this pen drop? It's because there's an explanation for why this pen dropped.
Well, you're looking for a range of options.
What do you mean?
Would a contingent fact, like, would a range of possible options qualify as a contingent fact?
No, because we're getting, I think, modal logic here. Modal logic is kind of thinking, like, what are the possible realities we live in? Premise one is very simple. If there is a contingent fact, I think we've kind of gone through contingencies. Every contingent fact has an explanation.
Maybe we'll need to get back to this one, because I'm having trouble with the definition there. It's just not working for me, because I'll give it one more quick try, though. If you notice a fact about the world, you can put it in one of two categories, necessary or contingent. A necessary fact is one that has to be the case, whereas contingent facts could have been different. Okay, so again, it looks to me like there's a realm of possibilities there.
Yeah. I would say contingency has, and if I'm contradicting myself, my apologies, but like, contingency deals with things that possibly could have not existed or could have not come into being. That's the whole nature of contingency, I would say. And necessary things, like I'd argue the necessary, I think you can accept 1 through 4 and get to a necessary being. And the necessary being is something that doesn't depend on an explanation. It's something that exists because it has to exist.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand what the first premise is. So to me, it looks like it's talking about... again, the hypothetical. That's where I keep coming back to. So I'm having trouble with why this is not looking at the hypothetical, looking at the different possibilities. So it almost looks like the first premise is one that's not even necessary in this argument.
Well, I think it is necessary, because if we get to, like, the third premise, it says there's an explanation of this fact, which includes all contingencies. That would have to be the case if premise 1 is true. Every contingent fact has an explanation. I get you don't understand maybe necessarily premise 1, which is based on, like, the principle of sufficient reason, but I'm not really seeing any objection to it. I'm just seeing, well,
I'm trying to understand it clearly, and I'm struggling with the term contingent fact. That's all, because that word contingency in there seems to be kind of it's kind of making this a very, very broad thing. So if there is a contingent, there is a contingent fact on premise 2. That includes all other contingent facts. All right. Can you give me an example of that one? So that's even more broad, it seems.
Well, yeah, it's using just kind of like thinking about things and using, like, philosophy. It's developed, if you guys want to look this up, it's called the Big Conjective Contingent Fact, the BCCF. Rob Coons has done a lot of work in this. Alex Proust has. And it's basically thinking, like, we can imagine, let's just say there's this big blob of everything. And it's all these facts that are contingent, right? We just imagine all contingent facts. It would seem like if every contingent fact has an explanation, well, no, I'm jumping to premise 3 here. All I have to do for premise 2 is say that we can just think of this big blob of everything, which includes all contingent facts. That'd be this contingent fact that contains all contingencies. Sorry, I was jumping ahead.
To the cosmos.
Sure. If you want to say, like, you can go to premise 4 here. And just go with the cosmos, and I think.
Well, hang on. Let's not skip premise 3.
I know. You're good.
So, so if we're going to say there's a contingent fact, say the cosmos is that fact, that includes all other contingent facts. Okay. Yeah, and the cosmos is absolutely everything, including all universes, etc. If there happen to be more than one universe, then that would include all universes. So
I'd say everything in the universe, including the universe, is contingent. Then that would be, that fits. Okay. I'm fine with that.
So, so I think we can probably go along with these, because these are more definitional anyway. So number 3 is the interesting one. Therefore, there's an explanation of this fact. So the explanation of this fact will be is where things start to turn here then. Okay, so this explanation, according to premise 4, is this explanation must involve a necessary being. And so my question is, what makes the being necessary for this.
Right, right. So it's helpful to understand that when we think of being, we think of something like us, something that like thinks. You don't, for the necessary like being part, that's just like philosophical jargon for like the necessary foundation. It doesn't necessarily have to be something conscious to accept premise for.
I don't think of beings as being limited to Tellarians, inhabitants of Earth, all the different species.
Like, and if you want to argue that the necessary being is a rock, like you can do that.
No.
I don't think anyone would do that. Like in this argument, a being doesn't have to be something conscious, doesn't have to be human, doesn't have to be God. It can just be like a rock or energy or quantum fluctuations or an infinite regress, any of these possibilities. So I think being can get mistaken sometimes if you're not super familiar with the argument. It's like it has to be something conscious. That's not the case.
Yeah, like absolutely nothing might work.
Sure, if you want to argue that that's your necessary being,
back to this
then
again.
we can do that.
So you're saying that the skeptics stop at this premise, and what are you finding that is the reason they stop at this one?
Right. Yeah. That's really good. I would say we're already at like 12 minutes. I don't want to get too far into the weeds in this and miss the other arguments. So let's move on in like a minute or two. And it's kind of good we're getting to the end of the argument.
No problem.
Like, why do skeptics stop at this and kind of go with like, well, hey, there's an infinite regress, or Grandma Oppie, who's brilliant, it's like, well, there's just these brute facts, something along those lines. And I mean, I think it's because like, first off, they're atheists, so they're not going to accept the conclusion that God exists. So they're going to have some sort of other necessary being. So yeah, it's just kind of different understandings of like what this necessary being would be. And if you're going to argue that there is, and I know you're not arguing this personally, but if you're one of these skeptics who would stop at this premise and say that it's something else other than God, they'd argue that maybe it's simpler or something along those lines. So there's a lot of loops you can go through.
Infinite regress. I wonder how that would factor into any of this.
Well, I mean, you could argue that there's this regress that's just necessary. But yeah. So we have like a minute left before I'd love to get on to some other arguments. Anything I'm going to bring up? Because it seems like to me, just sorry to interrupt. I haven't really seen I'm guessing you hop off at 4, but I'm not really seeing an objection to 1, 2, and 3. You've just kind of had like questions.
Well, maybe you want me to hop off at 4, but I want to ask you about number 5 because you're saying this necessitates God.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how all of this proves God.
Yeah. This is great. This is the heart of the whole argument. It's like there's 2 stages. There's like 1, there's a necessary being, and 2 is this necessary being is God. And we could talk like for like 20 hours on this. But like why? Very briefly, I just brought forth an argument from limits. I think that all arbitrary limits depend on outside explanations. So the foundation wouldn't be arbitrarily limited. It would be limitless. And I think a limitless foundation would have all power since it brings everything into existence, being the necessary foundation. It'd be personal because it would bring everything into existence. And I know I threw a lot at you, so if you want to push back, that's fine. But I would like to move on to some other arguments here very soon.
Okay, yeah. So where I'm having problems with this is at point 5 because all the stuff before it doesn't seem to point to the God of Christianity. I assume that's the one that you're promoting in this. You're assuming in this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't have to be the God of Christianity.
I want the dots connected, and I'm not seeing the dots being connected for this 5th premise. Or the point 5, I guess, was the conclusion. This necessitates God. I'm not seeing the dots being connected there. And that's I guess that would be my objection. That's where I'm stuck with this.
So how would you respond to the problem of arbitrary limits?
What is the problem of arbitrary limits?
So arbitrary limits is what I was bringing up before, like the foundation is limitless because all limits we encounter is arbitrary. So the foundation, whatever it may be, wouldn't be arbitrarily limited by some set of like atoms or superstrings or particles or anything along these lines because all limits depend on other explanations.
I don't see those as arbitrary. I see those as just facts of nature.
Well, I mean, it's very easily conceivable that it could be like one more unit of energy if that was your necessary foundation, or some particle or superstring or something along those lines.
Okay. Has there been a demonstration of that anywhere?
Does there need to be? I mean, I think that first off, all in our experience, every limit we encounter is a product of other limits. So I think that is demonstrated. Even if, yeah.
And the limit of photons being able to move at a particular speed and not very much faster than that before breaking down seems to me a fact, not necessarily an arbitrary limit that's dependent on other limits.
Right. I'll just give one more thought here because I would like to move on here. I know there's so much here.
No problem. No problem.
What I'm arguing for arbitrary limits is things like particles, superstrings, or matter. The amount of them, like there's no cutoff. I think you're talking like the laws of the cosmos, and that's fine. Like I think it's independent.
Physics I was talking about, but okay.
15 minutes. I thought we said 40 minutes. According to my timer,
I remember 40 minutes is what they said. So
yeah, I'm planning on 25, and if we're wrong, please interrupt me, and I apologize for sounding like very demanding.
No problem.
But I would say that like we're talking about arbitrary limits. 45 minutes. Okay, so when we're talking
There's
about
an arbitrary limit.
I'm talking about like things that like with cutoffs, like particles. I don't think particles are the necessary foundation because there's no necessary cutoff in the amount of particles that would exist in the foundation.
Okay.
I guess the reason why to think that would be true.
Okay.
I mean, we can move on. We can move on if you want, and we can cover that argument again and give our closing thoughts. I'd love to talk to you about fine tuning because there's a lot of fun stuff there.
Yeah, sure. Let's go on to fine tuning then. William Lane Craig is famous, so yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Yeah, and I thought about doing a probabilistic argument, like under theism, fine tuning is expected; under atheism, fine tuning is not expected. But I feel like just for like this debate, like Craig's argument is probably the most simple way to kind of do the fine tuning arguments. I kind of like to hear where you jump off and like what you disagree with. So it should be a lot of fun.
So the fine tuning argument, I guess you had laid it out. I think. Sorry, my notes don't cover everything here, but did you want to go over the fine tuning argument? Just quickly review it first.
Sure. All right. So the fine-tuning argument that I presented, premise one, the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Premise two is not due to physical necessity or chance. The conclusion, therefore, it is due to design. That's the argument I presented. I think it works. I think there's better formulations of it, like more how Robin Collins would do it, but I think this form also works. So I'd love to hear like what your thoughts are.
Okay, so physical necessity is interesting. Why do you call it physical necessity?
Right. So some people would argue that like maybe the constants, maybe with the early universe, like I brought forth in the debate, I brought forth one in the constants and one in the early universe conditions. But some people, like I think Graham Oppie would do this, would argue that these constants are just necessary. They exist at the certain like number that they do because they just have this necessary component to them where they had to be this way. So that's what I mean by physical necessity is like the gravitational, the low entropy was 10 to the 123rd because necessarily that was the case.
Okay, well, that seems a reasonable number based on what we know. So the universe is due either to physical necessity or chance. It is not due to physical necessity or chance seems to be a contradiction of that first premise. Oh, okay, so it's an either or. It's one of those two things. So
yeah, it's bringing up these three options here, and it's like, well, these two fail, so this is the conclusion.
Oh, so you think they fail? Physical necessity and chance fail.
Right. Yeah.
And why do you think they fail?
Sure. So I brought this up in my opening statement.
Yeah.
First off, physical necessity. Let's just talk about the principle of indifference for a second here. You guys can look this up if you're current. This is part of Bayesian statistics. I brought this up in my opening statement. And the principle of indifference states that in the absence of any relevant evidence, agents should distribute their credence or degrees of belief equally among all possible outcomes under consideration. I have just a quote here from Robin Collins that'll lead kind of talking about like why I think that fine-tuning isn't physical necessity based off of like this idea in Bayesian statistics. And here's his quote. He's one of the leading theistic experts in fine-tuning, so lots of fun there. He says, in the case of fine-tuning, we have no more reason to think that the parameters of physics will fall within the life-permitting range than any other range, given the atheistic single universe hypothesis. That's according to the principle of indifference, equal ranges of these parameters should be assigned equal probabilities.
So are these people saying that they know what the ranges of these fine-tuning parameters could possibly be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we could easily conceive that these constants could have been different. I think that most people would agree that, like, yeah, we could conceive of maybe like the gravitational constant being weaker or stronger. We could consider like the volume of the low entropy of the universe. It could have been larger. It could have been smaller. Yeah, so I think that like we can conceive of differences in the absence of any kind of like undercutting defeater. We should assign these equal probabilities. Like, I think a good example is, let's say I have like this coin here, my grandfather's old coin. It's like heads or tails. I can only flip it once. Let's say I flip it. I got heads. You didn't see that. I'm sorry. Should we assign that since we can only flip this coin once, the probability of it always landing on heads is 1?
Okay.
I would think no, just because the principle of indifference here.
Okay, yeah. So if we don't have all the information, it makes it difficult for us to predict things accurately. Concern I have with this is, while it's certainly interesting to consider the possibility of different universal constants, I really wonder how effective. I'm not convinced that that's even possible. To me, I think for that claim to have credibility, that it would be possible for those constants to have been changed, we're going to need to be able to prove that somehow. At this point, it's only kind of an idea. It's not something I'm not close to considering it, but my understanding is that, like Richard Carrier was talking about this before, he was saying that with if say the constant of gravity was changed a little bit, things wouldn't all suddenly be crushed or suddenly all be falling apart. There's still a lot of other factors involved that help keep things together. Sure, we'd have a stronger gravity, and we may have evolved in creatures much like ourselves, possibly still would have evolved into an environment with a stronger gravitational force, a gravitational pull, and still been able to function and survive. For all we know, there could be other planets with the stronger gravity already. That's got species living on there that are much stronger than us. But to them, if they look at what we're doing and lifting weights and doing different things, probably they would end up thinking, oh, that's the same for them, not really noticing any difference until they come and actually encounter the different gravitational force. So I think there's a lot more to this that needs to be understood, and I would like to see some really solid ideas on what will happen if some of these constants have changed. And I'm just not seeing it. It just doesn't. What we have is 100% in this in reality. We're seeing how things are.
Right. All right. So there's a few things you brought up there.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to think about how to kind of progress through this. First off, sorry, there's just a lot. With verification, like we should be able to verify or something like that. You can't verify that statement. You're making a philosophical statement to base the idea that you need to verify things on, but you can't verify your own statement empirically. At least it's just kind of like a philosophical basis you go off of.
Mm-hmm.
That's no reason why if we're just going based off of that. Like, why is your philosophical basis better than mine?
Well, that's why I call it an idea at this point. Yeah,
sure. And I think that kind of argument that verifying is helpful, but I don't think it's I don't think we need to, because if we needed to, we couldn't verify your own statement that we need to verify claims, and that'd be kind of just self-refuting.
Sure.
So it's helpful, but I don't think it's necessary.
Well, I think what makes it necessary is to validate the argument's conclusion that it's due to design, and that physical necessity and chance are therefore ruled out.
So would you say that we need to verify truth claims about things?
I think when it comes to the fine-tuning argument, that if you want to prove that to validate the idea that those that physical necessity and chance are ruled out as invalid, then that's going to need to be verifiable, because that's a pretty big claim. And to say it's due to design, we need something more definite than just ideas on this.
What would that evidence look like?
I would like to see some evidence of how these things actually have failed, and I want to see something more convincing than just a simple assumption that that everything is designed.
Well, it's not an assumption. It's the fine-tuning argument. We're looking at these different kind of conceptions of why are the constants the way they are. Is it because of physical necessity? Is it because of chance? Is it due to design? And I think we can rule out physical necessity by the principle of indifference. And I think we can rule out chance when we look at, like, when you combine the dozens of fine-tuning examples. I think we can kind of rule out chance. I do want to clarify. I remember what I was going to say earlier with the gravitational constant. I think it's helpful to remember I'm not arguing about the gravity on Earth. I'm talking about the gravitational constant at the foundation of the as the initial conditions of the universe at the constants. It's
What
nothing.
the gravitons do. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I understand. So again, it's making a conclusion that physical necessity and chance are not valid. So
I mean, I brought reason. I just didn't assume it. I gave you reason. I said the principal indifference and the sheer improbability are good reasons to rule out the physical necessity.
It's an argument, but it's not convincing enough. We need to actually be able to test this and validate this to say the fine-tuning argument has the credibility. And an argument is fine. It's philosophical at this stage, but I want to see that this is actually the case. We want to see that a scenario where physical necessity and chance actually has failed, and that the only possible option is design, and that it can't be explained by some other means. So,
right.
The watchmaker argument and whatnot here.
No, I would say this is nothing like the watchmaker argument. I would say I think is very different.
Okay.
I would like to clarify because I think I'd love to get to the argument for miracles. There's a lot of fun stuff there.
Sure. Okay.
Second, I would say we can, in a sense, test how different constants would play out. I was talking with, I believe it was Luke Barnes in the past, who's an astrophysicist. I think he got his degree at Cambridge. He's talking about how do we model, because he's a big guy on fine tuning. How do we understand if the constants were different, what would happen? Well, we have computer simulations, so I think we can test and verify if the constants are maybe these certain examples, things fall apart and nothing forms together, and there's no kind of life that could exist. So I would say that we can test if these constants are different in certain degrees, then we have a universe where there's no life of any kind that can develop. So I would say we test that. And I would say overall with the project, if you're just not convinced, that's fine on a personal level, Randolph. If you're just not convinced, I can't force you to be convinced. That's not that's not possible. But that's not an argument. That's just you not being convinced. It's not a reason for me to doubt. It's just, and just if I could finish here, please. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, you let's just say you presented a bunch of evidence for the theory of evolution, and I personally have no problem with accepting evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you bring a bunch of it, and I'm just well, Randolph, that's cool, but I'm just not convinced. You see, you'd have to verify it for me. I need this exact transition fossil to prove to me that evolution is true, and if you don't, well, I'm just not convinced. That's not an argument against evolution. That's just you not being convinced.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'm helpful to move on, so I'll let you finish this fine tuning, and I'd love to move on to miracles. So
yeah,
I'm sorry for interrupting you. Sorry.
No, you didn't interrupt. It's fine. This is back and forth. It's normal. I would like to see, to answer your question, an actual universe with different constants and see what the outcome is. And we don't seem to have access to that. That's why I say this is just in the philosophical realm, just an idea. It's not proven, in my view, because of that. We don't actually have anything solid to verify this with. Computer simulations are helpful, but reality is different, and computer simulations can also be wrong. I work in computers.
I don't. Okay. I'll respond to that in my closing. But I'd love to move on to miracles. What are your thoughts on the argument for miracles? I'd love to talk about the study you brought up. But before we get into that, is there anything else you want to bring up in terms of the argument for miracles?
Well, miracles, from my understanding, what I've understood from miracles is that they're all anecdotal reports. There's report of, I think, Jesus healing a blind person once, and another time where he turned water into wine, and different things like that. An anecdote isn't all that reliable, unfortunately. It's possible that people could do a magic trick to make things look like something else, and there's many different ways that those can be done. Matt Dillahunty goes into that quite a bit. He's talked about how to use magical techniques to make things appear like they're out of thin air and whatnot, and that's true. We see people. There's what's the fellow's name? Chris something or other. A younger fellow in Las Vegas. He walked across water, and then people went into the water and found nothing in there. It was quite an incredible display. Sorry about that.
Popular man.
No, it's for somebody else. Shucks. So I have questions about. I'm thinking when I see this argument, miracles happen. It's saying if miracles happen, God exists, and so this right now I think reduces the scope limits the scope to God created miracles that were created by God or executed by God or done by God somehow. And then the next one is just miracles happen. That's a claim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
all right. Yeah. Are you good at anything else before I kind of respond?
But I think if miracles happen, can actually be proven and reproducible in the lab, so to speak, then of course miracles that are created by God, and then that can give a lot of credibility to the final conclusion there. So the sticking point on that one is number 2.
Right. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot. First, I want to talk about the study that you talked about because you claim that you said that and the study debunked kind of my previous studies. I would disagree with that because I think to debunk my study, you'd have to present some sort of like defeater to my studies. All you've brought is a different study kind of contradicting what I've said. So right now, it seems like to me, at the worst for my position, we have one study that says, yeah, there's this significance of prayer in a double-blind study, and this other side where prayer does nothing. So at best, we're neutral. But I would say that I think there's something that said about the size. The size isn't that different. Like I was looking at the study. I think in this study you have about 2,000 people being studied. In the one article, and in the one I presented, the one in 1988, you have about 400 people, and then the one that I have in 2001, you have about 1,000 people. So I don't think we can just dismiss my two because yours had a little bit larger quantity. Like there's margins of errors on these things for a reason. So I don't think we can just dismiss that. So like why? I think the question becomes then why do we have these couple studies that show that prayer seems to some degree help in another one where it seems like there's just no difference. Like I think I have no problem admitting in the study that you talked about, there's no issue. It seems like prayer doesn't do anything. And I think we should consider God as a free agent. God isn't obligated to work like a law of physics where he has to do something if something happens. Like for this one study, he may have healed some more people. And for this other study that you bring up, he may have just chosen to do what he normally does and it didn't make any difference. Like I think that's fine.
I don't have the information handy, but I do remember reading that one of the reasons this new study came about was because the previous ones had been debunked. There were some problems with the way they were carried out and some flaws in them. And so they were much more careful with the new study to make sure things were actually done properly. I'm sorry I don't have the information, but that's something I do recall reading. So
right. Well, I mean, I'd have to see that data. Like, I can't just say like,
right now.
You found something that says this is debunked. Well, okay, but you haven't given me like this data. I do think that this is more of like a probabilistic argument. Like, I think like if God exists, we'd expect prayer to happen, to be fulfilled. Yeah. If God doesn't exist, we wouldn't expect it. So it seems like what's happening in this evidence is just it's in line with God existing. I think that this just kind of serves like in a more evidential way. I think that the other two arguments are more powerful, and I think this argument just kind of fits with like what we'd expect if the other two arguments are true.
Well, the thing is, we have this idea that people can pray to their God, and then God will deviate from his master plan for everything, being omniscient, knowing everything, and make an exception and help somebody out more, and they call that a miracle. It's my understanding is it's not part of the master plan.
Can I clarify here?
Yeah.
So I would say maybe that's somewhere else where you heard a miracle defined. That's not how I would define a miracle. In my opening statement, I defined a miracle as an event that would occur if an event that would not occur if metaphysical naturalism is true. And that's like the idea there's a causally closed system, there's no God. All I'm saying is a miracle is an event that would not occur if the causally closed system was true.
So does that eliminate the necessity of prayer then?
I don't see any reason why it would. Why would it?
So then if that's the case, then why should anybody pray for these miracles? They should just happen on their own, right?
Well, I don't see how that challenges the argument at all. I think you're maybe like bringing in an objection to prayer in the sense like what is the usefulness of prayer? Well, but it doesn't challenge any of the evidence that I brought forth, at least from what I understand.
You did raise the power of prayer with those studies as evidence for the miracles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I do think that's relevant.
Oh, okay.
That's why
So you're
I'm
saying,
raising this.
why pray if God already knows everything?
Well, yeah. If God is omniscient, then God knows what's going to happen next, and is not going to be able to change that.
Right.
Right.
Well, no. Well, he would. All right. So there's a lot of things at play here. One is your theory of time. I'd love to talk about the one God, two God thing. So I'll give you my response here very briefly, and then you can respond. And I'd love to talk about that in the last few minutes. I think there's some issues there. But all I would say to that is, as a Christian, we're instructed to pray. So I pray. Like, I don't think that, I think God can know the future, but that doesn't mean, God knowing the future doesn't mean that he has to act in the same way. Like, I think God's free. God can do what he wants, and he can know what he freely will do. And there's no issue with that. I also think I could just be an open theist and kind of get out of everything you're saying. So I don't think this really carries any force against the argument. And I'll give you the last word to respond, and then I'll go in my closing, because I'd love to talk about the multiple gods thing really briefly.
Do you think that, it sounds like you're saying your God knows what's going to happen in the future, but can alter that?
I would say God knows all true propositions.
So he's not omniscient then?
No, he would know all past, present, and future truth statements, anything.
So a true statement would be that we're going to have snow in a couple of days, let's say, and weather prediction says there's going to be snow in a couple of days, and we get snow in a couple of days.
Sure. I would love to just get your final thoughts, because I really want to get to this one God thing, because it's really important.
Well, this is important too, because I'm trying to understand here, because if God is omniscient and God knows we're going to get snow in a couple days, if God was to change that, then it would be he didn't know that he's changed it, so he's not actually omniscient anymore. It's a bit of a paradox, don't you think?
No, I mean, God knows what has happened, will happen, and is happening. So I don't think there's any issue here.
So he knows that we're going to get snowfall, but for some reason he decides to change that at that time that we've got snowfall. You're saying that does not invalidate his omniscience in the past, when he knew that that's going to happen, and then if you had a divine simplicity, maybe, but I just don't see a contradiction here. And I mean, you could just be an open theist, and God would still exist, and this argument would still hold, even if your argument did hold. But I really would like to get to this. We have 2 minutes left. I'd really like to get to this. Let's get on to the next one. Go ahead.
Fire. Sorry, I'm really sorry. I just
no problem. Shoot.
So my question for you is, in asserting multiple deities, why assert that multiple limited deities are just as valid? Multiple arbitrary limited deities are just as valid as just one maximally great unlimited being. Why?
I didn't say they were limited.
So these beings are both maximally great.
Sure. Why not?
Well, let's say
I said they could both be omnipotent and omniscient. They could share these traits.
And they have unique minds. Is that what you'd say?
No, they're separate individuals, but they all know what's coming. So why change it?
Well, I don't see why you'd posit this extra being. It seems like it's just an extra commitment. Why assert that there's two? I don't see any reason to think there would be two. Mm-hmm. One's a simpler explanation. Why think there's two maximally great beings when one would do the job just fine? We have Occam's razor.
Share the workload.
I mean, that's funny, but I don't think that's really a counter argument.
Yeah, and I'm not limiting just to two. There could be multiple, but I'm curious, why couldn't multiple deities share the same traits of omniscience and omnipotence as just one?
Well, I think you have to pose multiple minds.
What happens if that deity fails? Then nothing. But if you have multiple deities and one fails, the others can fix it. Maybe.
Well, I'd argue that God is perfect, so God could never fail. So I don't think that would hold.
So God has never failed?
Well, what do you mean by fail? I think God's perfect. So I don't think he can just be if I didn't know that was going to happen, I made a mistake.
Oh, he flooded the world and started over. That wasn't correcting a mistake.
Well, I wouldn't argue that God. I'd hold to a more partial Earth flood. So I wouldn't think that God flooded the whole Earth. I wouldn't hold to that position.
Oh, okay, so you disagree with the Bible on that. Okay.
No, I disagree with man's interpretation of the Bible.
Oh, okay. So, because that's so common, people interpret that way, and that's what I'm hearing from you. You're the first to tell me it's not a complete global flood.
It's a very rich tradition. There's lots of people who would assert that the flood was partial. John Walton's a great scholar, inspiring philosophy, the YouTuber. It's a very rich tradition. It's not. I mean, it's not the most common belief, but it's definitely not just like something that just I believe.
Now, a lot of people apparently and animals died in that flood.
Okay.
Do you take it that way or not?
Yes, but I don't see how this relates to multiple deities.
Okay, well, no, it's relating to what you're saying about the deity being perfect. Now, I think perfection would mean not killing innocent individuals.
Why?
Because I think the perfect thing to do is to help innocent individuals instead of killing them off. But that's my standard. But you think that a perfect being could kill innocent individuals and that would still be a perfect deity?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of great things to bring up here. I don't think we're going to have to get time to get through it all, as Oz is screaming now in the live chat. But all I'll say very briefly...
Oh, yes? I'm not watching the private chat, sorry.
is that if God exists and there really is an afterlife, no one dies, they just change locations. So that's all I'll say on that, because we're going to be gone. So I'll shut up now. So, yeah, sorry.
Jeff. All right. Round 3. What are your thoughts?
Pretty good. I think we had a lot of back and forth, a lot of a good conversation, really.
And I do wish we could have gotten the miracle stuff a little more, because I'm always interested to hear how that is an argument for the existence of a God. Without the sufficient evidence, I guess. So I would have loved to hear more of that. But again, I have to say it, and I hate to beat the dead horse. I do appreciate both parties being prepared, and Zach. After some of the people that we've had come in on the, not all, but some of the people that we've had come in on the theist side. We've had one or two on the atheist side too. Don't get me wrong, but come in and just ill prepared. It's really nice to have somebody show up and they have a formatted discussion they want to have. So that's awesome. But a couple plugs here while we let those gentlemen take a deep breath and get a drink of water or something and have a time to collect their thoughts for their closing statements. We have the show on the 17th with Dave Warnock, if I can spit it out here. Dave Warnock, make sure you come and check us out for that. And then we have the 6-member panel discussion on who was Jesus historically. That's on the 23rd. It's a Saturday. Then that same night, after that discussion's over, we're still trying to figure out, Apostle Mike and I, if we're going to do Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatnot. But we are going to purchase and watch the Conor McGregor fight that night. And any and all are welcome to come. And if you want to be part of that and just hang out, like I said, we're paying for it. You don't have to worry. The only thing you need to buy is your alcohol or your drinks, whatever you want to bring to your party. And we'll get you.
You have your own TV. We're not providing TVs.
TV, computer, phone, whatever you want to be on. Make sure you do that. And the easiest way to get on the list for that, just email me, austin@tart.live. We'll get you hooked up. And I'm building a spreadsheet, so I make sure I don't lose track of anybody. But we'd love to have you be a part of that. And then Jeff alluded to it earlier, myself included, but the TART team are now creating their own spin-off shows from the TART live show, and they'll all have their own title and premise, and I'm not gonna be a spoiler, but I could tell you what they're working on and what they're doing is fucking awesome, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be amazing, and a lot of them pre-recorded, so a lot of there'll be a lot of good production value in those as well. So that's something excited. We're excited about going. Well, we're in it now for 2021. We're putting 2020 behind us, and hopefully we'll get past all this COVID bullshit. So Jeff, what do you think? Should we bring these gentlemen back on?
Yeah. What's next? What's our next part?
Yep. So we're going to go into closing statements, 10 minutes each, and then we'll go to Q&A. So what I'm going to tell you is, if you have questions for Randolph, for Zach, start putting them in, and I will do the best I can do. Usually on these debates, they come swarming in. So I'll try to keep up. I'll just tell you right now, if you super chat, it stays on my screen longer. And I can capture it. So super chat's the most effective way to make sure that you communicate with the debaters and get your question asked. So without further ado, let's welcome Randolph and Zach back to the screen.
Right, so I guess I'll start. So I'll give my closing statement. I think I have 10 minutes, but it probably won't take that long. But just start, thank you again, TART, for hosting this debate. It's been a lot of fun. And thank you, Randolph, for interlocking with me today. It's a lot of fun. Randolph, great guy. Proves to me that Canadians are the nicest people on earth. Always fun to talk with Randolph. But with that being said, I just want to revisit the arguments that were brought forth. As far as I know, Randolph provided no arguments for whether you want to call it anti-theism or atheism, the belief that there is no God. Randolph provided no positive arguments for that. So at best, even if my arguments failed, we're left in the middle with kind of like our own personal experiences. But I think that we have still 3 positive reasons to think that God exists, and we're going to go through those right now. So first off, the argument from contingency that I brought forth, developed by Alexandre and Leibniz and all kinds of really smart people. It seems like to me that the first 3 premises, every contingent fact has an explanation. There is a contingent fact that includes other contingent facts, and therefore there is an explanation of this fact. It seems like to me Randolph didn't really have any kind of objections to this. He's just kind of trying to understand it more, which is fine. And then he kind of was like, well, why think that the necessary being is God? And specifically the Christian God. I brought forth an argument from limits that the foundation would not be arbitrarily limited in any way in terms of like atoms or superstrings or particles or anything like that. As far as I know, I have not heard a positive reason to think that the foundation would be arbitrarily limited. So I think it's safe for me, at least in this debate, to assume that the foundation isn't, and it'd actually be limitless, at least in the arbitrary sense. Why I think it's the Christian God? Well, that would take 18 other debates, a lot of fun, or maybe someone else's own personal experience. I think that we can look like the facts surrounding Jesus and get there. There's all other kind of fun stuff. But I mean, I don't think like why the Christian God, like the contingency argument runs, regardless of whether it's the Christian God or Islamic God or Judaism, the God of Judaism. It argues for general monotheism, the contingency argument. The second argument was the fine-tuning argument. Randolph would challenge the first premise by saying, and I hope I'm representing him right, and if he doesn't, he'll have a conclusion to represent himself properly, and I look forward to that, and I'm not trying to misrepresent Randolph at all. But he said, well, I think it's just limited to physical necessity, chance, or design. Why are these our only 3 options? Well, I'd say that's the only things we have given our data. If Randolph wants to give a 4th thing or a 5th thing, well, we need to see some reason to believe that. But I mean, I think most people would kind of surround themselves around the idea of, at least science around physical necessity, chance, or design. Why I think it's not due to physical necessity. I think it's not physically necessary because the principle of indifference. Very briefly, to restate it, the principle of indifference, all it says that the principle of indifference states that in the absence of any relevant evidence, agents should distribute their credence or degrees of belief equally among all possible outcomes under consideration. To this point, I don't think Randolph's really given a reason to think that we should reject this principle. I haven't heard any relevant evidence that should say I shouldn't distribute my probability among all possible outcomes. So I would think that physical necessity would still fail because the principle of indifference. I haven't heard an objection to that yet, besides for the idea that it needs to be empirically verified, which is just self-defeating. Scientism, it fails a lot. And then why I think chance? Well, I didn't see any really objection to this either. I don't know if you'd agree with it, but I didn't see any objection to the why I think it fails due to chance. So I think we're left with design. So that's the second argument. Third argument was the argument for miracles. I mean, I think this argument holds still. I didn't hear any different. Sorry, I'm fumbling my words here. I didn't hear any disagreement with the first premise. If miracles happen, God exists, but miracles happen. I don't think that the studies I have are great, and I think they point towards miracles happening, but I think we can go so much further. If we dive into more studies, we could see all kinds of people who believe that miracles have happened in their lives. And it seems like there's a very strong basis for believing that miracles do in fact happen. And I would ask, as I brought forth those 2 studies that showed the effectiveness of prayer, what better accounts for the data here? Theism or not? I'll go with, I think anti-theism is what Randolph defined as the belief that there is no gods. I would think that theism would explain these studies quite well. If there is a God, it would make sense that prayers are answered. And if there is no God, I don't understand how these 2 studies happen, because there's no effective prayer whatsoever if the person doesn't know it's happening. Yet in these studies, it seems like there is some effectiveness to prayer. Randolph brings up his other study into the play, which showed that, there seemed like there was no effect in this 2006 survey, I believe. And that's fine. Like, I have no problem with accepting that conclusion, but that doesn't change these other studies. God's a free agent. He wouldn't have to act in the same way in every study being done. So I'll kind of leave that at that. In conclusion, this has been a lot of fun. I still think we have 3 positive arguments for God's existence. I haven't seen why these arguments would fail. Thank you, Randolph. Look forward to your response and looking forward to some fun Q&A.
Thank you very much, Zach. I have enjoyed this, and one thing I greatly appreciate is that in this debate, which I think you've done quite well in, I've learned that I have some weak areas, which is something that I do come to these debates for. So I consider this to be a successful debate for that, so thank you. Our first encounter was, you went a lot more easy on me. So I can see things. You've been really studying hard on this stuff, so I congratulate you on that, commend you on that. You're mentioning about how I did not bring up much in the way of anti-theistic claims, and that is because I don't hold the position. So you're right in how you quantified what I've said. And the reason I'm neutral on this, which I think is fine, is because I think that an anti-theistic perspective, as well as a theistic perspective, both have opposing claims, opposite claims. The anti-prefix informs us of that. Both have onus of justifications to satisfy, or burdens of proof to satisfy. And so for somebody to prove that a deity exists, and I do have criteria for that, but we didn't get into it. We can do that in the question period if someone wants to do a super chat for that. Hint, hint. But it's the anti-theistic perspective to state there absolutely are no deities in the universe or the cosmos is also one that carries that onus of justification, because in order to prove that, an anti-theist would have to demonstrate that every possible place in the universe simultaneously, we can't find any deities there. And we don't have the tools to do that at this point. We can explore our solar system remotely. We've sent people to the moon, but we really haven't really been to these other parts of our universe, let alone the cosmos, to be able to find out. And we don't even know what the full size of our universe is. So we're stuck with a lot of unknowns here. So that's kind of why I think there is a burden on both sides of the theist and anti-theist side of things. And I'm trying to be quite fair in stating all this, because I think it's important to do that. And you have been, I think. Your 3 reasons that you talked about, the argument from contingency. The problem I have with that one is that the conclusion for me fails to connect the dots to your God. And so that's the big leap between that and the other parts of it. I'm not convinced about it being a being, and a being having omniscient and omnipotent characteristics, which would, I think, require some sort of consciousness. We can get into that later, but feel free to shake your head yes or no. But the big one for me in that argument from contingency is the conclusion seems to be introducing the God at this point without the dots being connected. And that for me is missing. So that argument, I think, fails in that regard. The fine-tuning argument being limited only to a small subset of options. And you're asking, what are these 3 options? And that's a fair question. What are the other options? And that's a fair question. The problem with that is I'm not, I need to see that there are other universes that we've actually been able to change the constants, or at least observe, that have different constants, so that we can know that that argument actually holds water. It is depending on the variability of these constants, but we don't know if they're actually variable. And that's where that argument falls down, in my opinion. As far as miracles are concerned, we did get into the first premise is okay. I'm fine with it because it's conditional and it limits the scope. It's more definitional than anything, and so it's fine. It's that second premise that that has problems, I think. And ultimately, we did talk about like we talked about the power of prayer. And unfortunately, I didn't know that this topic would be coming up, so I didn't have the foresight to bring with me the kind of studies that would be needed on this. So I certainly would not claim victory on this, since I didn't have the information with me. I think it would be unfair for me to do so. I'm going with the most recent study that seems to put it at about close to a 50-50 mark, and it kind of leaves things at a neutral point. So I'm not really at the point where I'm convinced of this. The big problem that I see with miracles is that they are anecdotal, and that, and you said you don't subscribe to this, but many Christians that I've talked to do, that a miracle, in a sense, is a deviation from God's master plan. And that seems to me to defeat his omniscient nature. And that's where I think the argument for miracles falls down. Thank you very much. I appreciate the mutual respect, and really enjoyed this conversation with you. Happy New Year.
Well, Jeff, what are your final thoughts? What do you think?
I'm looking forward to Q&A, man.
Yeah, me too. But how do you? It's up to us. How'd that go?
It's up to us.
It's up to us.
Okay. I have no issues with this debate. I think it was very well. I think it was very well versed. I think we had two people that had very good arguments and very well thought out responses. So it was a nice little parlay.
There was the respectful back and forth. At the Atheist Roundtable, we always respect that, and we always appreciate that. I absolutely love Randolph, and now after hearing Zach and his preparation and presentation, I have a ton of respect for him. And but you know me, Jeff. I'm always the one that's like uncomfortably brutally honest. And I would have to give this one to Zach as far as presentation. And again, I don't agree with his God claim, but as far as just the presentation point by point, so all the Christians are going to love me because I just gave the last two debates to the Christians. And it's not for lack of preparation on Randolph's part, because he's very, very sharp man. Always comes with ready and a great argument. But Zach point by point was I felt was more sharp in this presentation. So yes, Christians, you heard it here at the Atheist Roundtable, 2 debates in a row. We've given it to the Christians. So quit telling us that we don't love you. we love you. We love you. But before we bring them back on, because we want to get into Q&A, if you're not asking your questions in there, well, that's your fault. And if you don't ask questions, I'm just going to let Jeff ask a bunch of questions.
I have a bunch of questions,
and that'll be even
putting them in right now. Actually,
that'll be.
I'm trying to keep within the constraints of a $5 super chat, and so I have to rethink how I word this.
Okay. All right. So while you're working on that, I'm going to bring them on. And I know a few questions popped up, and there was one early in the show that I screenshot on my phone. I'll ask that here in a minute, and I'll make sure we get to that because it was a super chat. But for everybody that's hung out with us tonight, there's been 60 or more on a regular basis hanging out with us and chatting. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for choosing to hang out here with Jeff and I, two knuckleheads, and two other gentlemen that are much more intelligent than we are, much more better looking than we are. We appreciate that. So we'll get them on screen, and we'll dive into the Q's and the A's.
I just want to say something real quick. I agree with you, Oz. Zach had an excellent presentation at the opening statement, especially. Definitely more professional than mine.
Well, and Randolph, thank you for saying that. And because I wanted to say it in that break. Again, Zach, thank you. For how you came to our channel for the first time, and we value that. We appreciate that. You're welcome back anytime to have a debate or discussion. And Randolph. One thing I appreciate about Randolph is his humility, and he does want to come to each platform, each stage, and learn. And man, if you cannot appreciate that, whether you're an atheist or you're a theist, you're in the wrong spot. And that means
additional for me. Yeah.
No, and that's great. And but see, guys, that's what this is all about. At the end of the day, like the debates are fun, all that's fun, but it's like if we are all on a pursuit of truth. That's what it's about, is learning and gaining more knowledge, gaining more information. So I think that's brilliant. I think we all won if you look at it that way, But we'll get to a few questions here. Let me scroll up here. Nope, that's not it. Where was it? There it is. Question for Randolph. Can you say we construct possible physical worlds using math? And thereby see what would happen.
I guess they mean SEE.
I'm assuming so. Yeah.
We can do it conceptually for sure. Computer modeling is certainly a part of this, but of course, what often happens is what we do theoretically doesn't always match what we do in reality. So. Even though we can do that there, we don't know that that's how things will definitely act in reality. So a real world test is really going to help us out. Hence the term litmus test.
Right. Let's see.
How much Q&A are we doing, like time-wise? Just
it just depends. There's not a ton there. So what we'll probably do is I'll get through what's here, and then maybe do like a cross-examination from maybe Jeff and myself, just some of the things that we observed, maybe ask you guys some questions and then wrap.
Sounds good.
Where'd it go? Oh, I already pulled it up. Sorry. Question for both. If Christ did not resurrect, why no official opposition from the Jewish Sanhedrin? A guy dead for 3 days and then reappearing alive and well to many would be quite noticeable. Yes? Question mark.
I don't know what the Jewish perspective on that would be. I do wonder if there is truth to that story, that what happened during those 3 days seems to be really vague. I don't know if somebody could have just passed out from alcohol and then finally came out of their cave. There's all kinds of different possibilities. Maybe he had a concussion or some kind of an injury that put him in a temporary coma. There's all kinds of things that come to mind that I've not been able to rule out. So maybe Zach has some insight on this.
I mean, honestly, I'm a lot less versed in my theology rather than my philosophy. So I don't know. I mean, I think especially when we're dealing with like ancient history, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. But I kind of leave it at that for now because it's not. I don't think it's really relevant to the debate topic. But thank you for your question, and that's kind of where I'd leave it.
Well, they are asking about the Jewish reaction anyway, and you're a Christian, so yeah.
Yep, and yeah, I have my own opinions about that, but we'll move on. This is a super chat from that guy above you on. Zach, you said it was improbable that chance, physical necessity are responsible for the universe. You said it was improbable, not impossible. Is it possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yes, I would think it's possible. I think a possibility like is something greater with a probability of greater than zero. So if something has a probability greater than zero, I would say it's possible. So is it possible that it's due to chance? Well, yeah, of course. I think that's one of the three options I leave out in the premise. And then with like physical necessity, is it possible? I think it's possible because I don't see like any inherent contradiction in it. But I think that when we look at like the principle of indifference and things like that, I think there's very good reason to think that physical necessity is not the case. So possible, yes. Probable, I would challenge that.
One thing I generally agree, but I think that the words I would use differently instead of possible would be not impossible, because I think possible is veering toward it being a claim that this is something that can actually happen,
Like
not
probable.
impossible. Yeah,
That's fine.
All right, and then I saw a couple more pop up here. Oh, we got one more from the trolley one. Question for Zach. What would you expect the world to look like if God created the universe and left it to be?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I guess you could take this kind of like that's what deists believe. What would I personally expect? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I expect like, like theistic arguments, like a contingency argument to work. But then things like maybe like fine tuning or like an argument for miracles, I don't think those would work if God created the universe and kind of just left it to be. So I think that's kind of what I think, but it's a good question. I have to give it more thought.
I would kind of like, what would your observation be? Like, what would we observe about the universe that would be different from our observation today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like, in terms of like, I believe that God does exist and He interacts in the world today and such. Yeah, I think that's really good. I would think that we wouldn't see as much as people claiming that there is a God that interacts in terms of like personal experience with like miracles and stuff. And I know that's subjective, but I think that's an important thing we could lay out. I think that studies like I brought earlier in the presentation, I don't think those would work if there wasn't a God that was interacting with the world. I think it'd be studies like the one that were not presented. So that's a few things.
Okay. And before I get to the other ones that are in the chat right now, because I do not want to forget, I have this one I screenshot from earlier tonight.
It looked like you were making a phone call there.
Yeah, no, I would never do that live.
I know you wouldn't.
Zach, your name's in there. This is for you, but I still have to ask, how much of Christianity is Zach advocating, not just the presence of one God?
Right. The presence of, I mean, like I'm a Christian. I'd affirm like basic creeds, like, like you have like the death and resurrection of Christ, the Trinity, things like that. Like I would affirm all that. So in terms of Christian, the one God thing, I don't know if you're referring to the Trinity. Like I'm obviously not a polytheist. I believe there's one God that's the necessary foundation. But I do think obviously God exists as a Trinity in three persons. And I think that it's a good challenge to like from 4 to 5 in my contingency argument. But I think ultimately Trinity's result of perfection. I don't think there's any arbitrary limits to the Trinity, if that's what kind of you're inferring to. But I mean, it seems like an interesting question, so I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I think, and I haven't seen that person in the chat here for a few minutes, but I think what was being asked was, are you arguing for the Christian or Bible God, or could you just plant any God into that argument?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think with the contingency argument, you could plant any like monotheistic God. Like I think you could get the God of Islam or the God of Judaism. I think you could also get a deistic God or kind of like an Aristotelian God. So I think there's like different versions of like general monotheism that you could get with a contingency argument. Fine tuning, I think kind of the same, but I think you'd have to think that there'd have to be a God that cared about like maybe like embodied moral agents. And then I think with the prayer argument or the miracles argument, I think that you get to a God that cares about this world and is interacting in the world. So it just depends on the argument.
Just to clarify, that deity would have to have characteristics of omnipotence and omniscience. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
I think it'd help to flesh out what those mean. But yeah, I think that God's omnipotent and omniscient. And I think all those models of God would agree. So, I mean, there's open theists who are Christians and would say something challenging omniscience, but I don't think that's really relevant. So, yeah.
Right. And always remember to flush. Always remember to flush. That's important. A question for both. What's your guys' favorite color?
Blue or you're wrong.
I'm wrong. It's red right now. I change my favorite from time to time.
Jeff, what's your favorite color?
Green, dark green, or dark blue.
Me
This backlight's
too.
colored
Me
my
too.
cup now.
Yes, sir.
Me too. Me too. Oh, that was weird.
And believe it or not, pink. I like pink a lot too.
All right.
I was told at a young age that boys aren't allowed to like pink, so I had to abandon that.
Where'd
You didn't have free will?
I didn't. I was told you can't like that color.
Oh, what terrible childhood.
No.
oh, where'd it go?
You're free now, though.
Yes. And
When are you thinking?
Winter Chintz, yeah, if you super chatted, I'm not seeing it. And usually I see those. I keep my eye out because I always try to make sure I give those loves, period. But if you did, just re-ask your question. Don't super chat again. Just re-ask your question. I'll make sure.
or super chat again.
Or you can
saying.
super chat again if you really love us.
Maybe
If
you need to double the
really-
amount to see it longer.
If you really love us. And if you do it for like $100, I'll ask it like 3 times.
Yeah.
But here we go. Question for Zach. What is your response to people saying your resource wasn't double blind, but was actually a placebo?
I
Power
would just say
fair.
look it up. Like, I mean, I think it's like in respected peer-reviewed journals. So like I can like copy and paste the citations from my slide and put them in my private chat, and you guys can like put it in the public chat if you like. If you think they're double blind, just read the studies for yourself and come to the conclusion. Because I'm just literally like in those slides, I literally just basically took quotes from the articles. I mean, I appreciate the question, but I think just look it up for yourself and you can kind of see that they're double blind. So, yeah.
Okay.
Do you think that there's a better example? Like that's one example. Do you have something that maybe is even more clear of an example of miracle?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think personal experience can be useful in arguments for miracles. I think it can get tricky because there's a lot of things where it could have just easily fit under a naturalistic explanation. But I think someone's own personal experience, there's things where we could point to where it seems either very improbable or impossible that it would occur under the belief that God does not exist. I think that there's other studies. Craig Keener did a lot of work on this. But I mean, just for the sake of the debate, I just brought 2 examples from like peer-reviewed studies. I was hoping like, even if you disagree with the conclusions, you'd accept that like these are like these studies happen and they're like completely honest. Like you can disagree with like that prayer was a part of it, but you can agree like that there's no dishonesty in the study. So I figured that for like a debate, this was the best because I think that the studies, the results would be accepted even if you're a skeptic because it's like in peer-reviewed medical journals and such. So yeah.
Zach, you're a Christian. Everything you say is dishonest.
Dude, you're right. I need to go home now. I'm sorry. I need to go home.
While I was looking for the next question, while I was just looking for the next question, the other question I had for you is, why do you think that if God does exist and do miracles, why is it that he does these miracles in such a way that we just can't prove it and it's not clear?
Yeah.
Like it's almost
Yeah.
the same as chance when it comes to a miracle. It doesn't seem like there's a clear distinction between the two.
Yeah. That's great. I love that question.
Or in some cases, it seems like he's removed the evidence almost.
Yeah. I love this. There's a lot of things we could unpack here. I would disagree that it seems like it's always absent. Like a lot of this is going to relate to like divine hiddenness. Like if God is real, if God's personal, if he cares about us, why does he seem so hidden? That's a great question. And I first contest the idea that these results aren't obvious. Like I think that, we can look at like these peer-reviewed studies and it seems like something is happening here. I would contest if we look at like studies from around the world, to the vast majority of people, the existence of God is something that is plainly obvious. Like if you look at the world, like 99% of the world is theist, and I think there's a study done by Pew and they did like 10 or 12 different countries, and like 10 or 15% of all these people believe that there was like a personal God that had done like miracles in their lives. So I would contest the idea that like, well, while God may seem hidden to some people, to other people he seems very obvious. So I think if we're going to just go off personal experience, I think we're going to kind of have to cancel those 2 things out. So then we get to like the intellectual problem of like J.L. Schellenberg laid out a hiddenness argument where he's like, there's a contradiction between like an all-loving God and him like seeming hidden, there being like non-resistant non-believers. There's so much that could be said here. And I'd say that God seems hidden in part that we can have free will. I think that if God made his existence obvious in a way that we could not deny it, I think that we would have no free will because we'd have to choose him And I think the whole point of having free will is to develop a relationship, to choose him. So there's a lot that could be unpacked here. But yeah, so that's kind of like my basic answer.
Yeah, that's actually from the Christian perspective, that's a good short answer. Usually, that's not a very short answer.
It wasn't dishonest.
Completely dishonest.
You got me.
Completely dishonest. So
That's a loaded question, Zach.
we finally have some questions flowing in here, so let's have some fun. So
I will have to slide out in about like 10-15 minutes, just so you guys know.
All right, so then it's up to you to practice brevity.
Yeah.
It's Zach. It's up to you to practice brevity then.
You're right.
Question: what's the difference between a miracle and unexplainable phenomenon?
Great question, Atheist Chico. I don't know if you saw my opening statement, but in the slide where it says miracles happen, I define a miracle as an event that would not occur if metaphysical naturalism is true. So that's how I define a miracle. It's an event that would not occur if metaphysical naturalism is true.
I remember you saying that in your opening statement.
Boom! There we go. Oh man! And there, I thought I saw a bunch more pop in, and I got all excited. Hold on. Nope. No, those popped in. My bad.
I thought I saw a question about favorite colors.
We answered that.
I asked that.
Oh no, it was another one relating to it. So.
Oh, what did it say?
Something about God. From Captain Deadpool at 6:59 p.m. It says, "Did God predetermine our favorite color for us?"
Well, it's like, it sounds like a Calvinist argument.
And my response would be, not that I know of.
Oh, here we go. And I, since we don't have any other questions, and I know this isn't on the philosophy part, it's more theology. But since we don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and do it because I enjoy this conversation. And I'm going to be completely selfish right now. Question: explain. It's not really. I guess it's a request, not a question. Explain the crucifixion. Is that story a good or a bad story, and why?
I have an answer, but let Zach go first.
Let's say Zach, you're the Christian. So how would you answer that?
Right. Well, I'm assuming this is referring to the crucifixion of Christ, not just like any old crucifixion.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think the story of God taking on the flesh for us is a beautiful story. I'll keep it brief because I don't want to get to it. I think it's beautiful. And I mean, you could say like maybe penal substitutionary atonement's unethical or something like that. And like, if that's your personal belief, that's fine, but you don't have to believe in PSA to be a Christian or to think the Christian God exists. I mean, if it's true, it's true, but that's not a necessary component of Christianity. So I think God taking on the flesh, experiencing the evils that we do, I think that's a beautiful story. And you can kind of draw the theological conclusions from that you may, but I think God's perfect. And I think, yeah.
I think it's a bad story, and the reason is because I think vicarious redemption is unethical. He's dying for other people's sins, and that I have a serious problem with. That is not conducive to a proper justice system, in my view.
Cool. And I want to pull this up real quick. Where'd it go? Man, these things move so fast, it's hard to keep up with them. So don't mind the actual comment here, but Cooper Gates, you had tagged me in something and asked a question. I'm not sure what you're referring to. So if you give me a little clarity, I would love to help.
I'll attempt to answer. I did change my shirt today.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. Thanks, Randolph.
He's asking about change.
So everybody, all 60 people watching, Randolph changed his shirt today. So there you go.
They asked. I don't know.
Randolph wins. Game over. Question: is faith required to be a theist?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, one, it's going to depend on what you define as faith. I think a faith is just believing what you don't know with certainty, or with like 100% certainty, which is just about everything, at least from my perspective, because of like Bayesian stuff. So that's fun. So yeah, I think faith is required to be a theist, and I think that, yeah, I mean, we don't have 100% like absolute certainty, like 2 + 2 = 4, or that like the law of identity of non-contradiction that God exists. I think that there's a very high, I rank it very high, but I don't think it's like absolutely like laws of logic certain. So yeah, but I also think that I know Randolph defines atheism as just an absence of belief, but I think if you're going to follow the negation on the belief that God does not exist, I think that would take faith in a sense too, at least the way I define it, because I don't think you can know for certainty that there's maybe these brute facts or something like that. So I think it goes both ways.
It's not.
I think Zach made a really good argument for theism without appealing to faith during the debate.
I was about to say, I was like, man, like I was really digging Zach's argument, and then he said, yeah, faith is required. And I was like,
well, I mean, if we're going to follow the alternative to theism, non-theism, atheism, whatever you define it all the way through, I think you're going to have a similar view of what I see as faith too. So I think either way, you're not going to get absolute 100% Cartesian certainty. It's whatever
right,
you believe.
So if I can, Zach, just real quick, and sorry for over talking to you. I didn't mean to do that. I'm not Darth Dawkins you.
I'm not precept.
What is? How do you define faith? And maybe that'll help us.
No, yeah, that's a great question. Great question. I don't have like a working definition of faith that I always go to. I just kind of think of faith as something that I believe that I don't have absolute Cartesian certainty about. So like I have faith that God exists and that Jesus rose from the dead. I don't like know with certainty. I think there's really good reasons to believe it, but I don't have certainty about it. So like faith is kind of like, well, I see these reasons and these evidences, so I follow it through. Like the same reason I'd have faith that like maybe like my parents love me. Like I have a very high degree of probability that my parents love me, but I don't have certainty of it. I just have faith based off kind of like the data and evidence I've been given. So it's kind of like a working thing, but I don't have like an absolute definition of faith.
Okay, and if you'd want to, Zach, I would actually love to invite you on a regular TART live show to talk about that. That's our that's kind of our favorite thing to talk about is faith and how do you justify what you believe in. You know, sure. So if you're willing to do that, I would love to do that. And I know philosophy is your wheelhouse, but I do believe that all of us should always be trying to identify the way or the matter in which we justify our beliefs. So I'd love to have you on, just have that conversation. Nothing more, nothing. And you're going to get the same serious, but you're going to get the same semantics. We still love to have fun. So it'll be entertaining and serious conversations at the same time. But
as long as I get to listen to your voice, Oz, I'm in.
Okay.
You have a cool voice. I like your voice. So
you have chosen wisely. I just to first talk about faith and then address one point Zach made about faith. My understanding is, and I agree with Zach's idea of faith. I think that makes sense. It's a very reasonable way to define it, and it's. What I've noticed in talking with Christians over the years, when I ask Christians, what is a requirement to be a Christian? There very often are different reasons, but one reason it's always there is a belief in God, a faith that there is a God. So I think I'd be interested to know, Zach, if you disagree with that. I think you probably agree.
Wait, can you repeat that?
So in talking with different Christians over the years, the one common thing that seems to be with all Christians is a belief in God. Mm-hmm. That seems to be. I
mean, I think to be a Christian, you'd have to believe in God because Christianity hangs on the resurrection, and there's no resurrection without God existing.
Sure. Yeah. So, and that's what I'm finding with you as well. So it's quite consistent. Mm-hmm. When you mentioned about how I define atheism, that personalizes it to me, but I can't take credit for that. That is standard way it's defined. That's all I wanted to say on that one. Push back on it.
I mean, I don't really care enough to debate the definition of atheism. If that's how you define it, I have no problem with that. I'm not trying to say that in like a rude way, but yeah, that's fine.
I just clarifying, it's not me defining it. That's how it's defined. That's all. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we got one more question. And I'm sorry, I saw now several other ones are actually popping up now that I say that. And I apologize, but some of the folks have some things they got to get
you should have got it in earlier. You had all this time. Good
Yeah.
Captain. You wait till now.
I got a stack of like 18 zillion books over there that I need to read. So, you know.
Yeah. So I guess I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. Is that the saying? But one last one here. Super chat, Nathaniel Robinson. Thank you for $5. Can God do logically impossible? Big Rock, 100% man, 100% God, ungod himself in human form, not know when he will return, etc., etc.
Yeah, this is a great question. I remember Randolph bringing this up in the first debate that we had a long time ago, like a year and a half ago. And I was like, yeah, there's an answer to this. I just don't remember what it was. But yeah, this is a great question. This is like what's called part of the omnipotence paradox. There's like, can God create a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? All kinds of things like that. And I think it's helpful to remember, like, what is my definition of God in the beginning? I define God as maximally great. God can do all possible things. God can't create a married bachelor because that is self-contradictory. And I think that's good. There's a quote from Isaac Asimov that I had pulled up because I didn't know if it was going to come up in the debate, but it says that a universe in which there exists such a thing as an irresistible force is by definition a universe which cannot contain an immovable object. And a universe which contains an immovable object cannot, by definition, also contain an irresistible force. So the question is essentially meaningless. Either the force is irresistible or the object is immovable, but not both. It's just like responding to, can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? So God is maximally great. He can do all possible things. So there's no, if you want to call the laws of logic a restriction, you can, but God's not limited in any way. He can do all possible things. He's maximally great. There's no conceivable being greater than God. So that's kind of how I respond to that. So thank you.
Yeah, I remember that was on Modern Day Debate, and I do remember mentioning that that's a kind of argument I don't like to bring up because I find it meaningless as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which part of it, Randolph? Sorry.
The argument that he brought up that we had discussed briefly in Modern Day Debate a long time ago.
Oh, okay. Got it.
The only problem I see with it is that if he's maximally great and he can do anything, then that means any option that he made when reading a holy text, regardless of the holy text, means that he chose that option amongst infinite other options. Therefore, it should be the best option. And when you see things like a biblical flood, meaning I had to do it this way, when we can think of 1,000 other ways to do it that are better, or being able to complete a goal without interfering with free will, even though he interferes with free will all the time. So those are the only problems I have with the maximally great argument is like, well, then why would you do this? You know, and then it goes down a rabbit hole of like, well, this is the reason because of this excuse and blah, 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 blah. That's the only problem I have with that one.
Right. Can I respond to that just very briefly before we wrap things up here? I would be very
No.
brief. It was a great.
No.
We're good at ending conversations.
Fight him, Zach. Fight him.
Jeff would beat me up. He's more followers than me on TikTok.
Jeff. Okay.
Okay. Just very briefly, I would say conceivability isn't a very good guide to possibility. That's kind of like the first thing I'd bring up. Why this world? I mean, it depends on how you're gonna. A lot of it depends on how you're gonna interpret these texts. Like if you're good, like I don't interpret it in terms of a worldwide flood. I think God's.
You could say Jesus, like the option of Jesus, sending Jesus to atone for the sins that we originally got. That would be an option too that I don't see necessity for. Like it could have been completed a different way.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, I'm just trying to go off of the evidence that we've been given. Could have got. Yeah, I mean, it's possible that God could have created things differently, but I don't see why that would kind of lead to
Without
a different
sacrifice, without hate, without death, without torture. You know, there'd be a solution without free will. I mean, without interfering with free will.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sympathetic to a skeptical theistic position a little bit. I think with the problem of evil and such, I think we can look at like good theodicies, like a free will defense or understanding like divine hiddenness. But I also think there's just a point where we're just not going to be able to understand everything. But I do think that, like, given the data that we have, there's good reasons to accept God's existence and Christianity and such. And maybe there's different ways it could have gone that we may think of as better, but maybe in like the grand scheme of things, they're actually not that much better than we think they would be. And I think it's also helpful in terms of like understanding like theories of the atonement or the flood. Like, don't get caught up in one specific theory because there's just so many different ideas about how all these things are put together. So I'll leave it at that.
Cool. We'll wrap up here, guys. And before we do, I want to give. Sorry, I feel like something that's like bit me in the back. Damn.
Yeah, fleas. You got rid of those fleas though. We were talking about that earlier. You got that ointment the doctors gave you.
All the.
Oh, I'm sorry. We were talking about that earlier. That was something else.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for that asshole. But we'll wrap up here, and I appreciate everybody that's been with us. It's been like 60 and over almost the entire debate, so we appreciate that. And one last time, guys, plug and chill away. Anytime we have guests on the debate, we want to make sure you guys get your exposure, not just here, but then for people to follow, subscribe, follow, friend you, all that fun stuff. So, Randolph, we'll let you kick it off first this time. Tell everybody where they can find you.
First, just briefly, I'll say I really appreciate the debate tonight. I think Zach presented arguments better than I presented them, and I learned a lot. So thank you for that, Zach, for bringing your A game. It was excellent. You can reach me at on Twitter at twitter.com/Randolph828. That's Randolph spelled with an F. You can also find me at Canadian Atheists at www.canadianatheists.ca. I have a YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Randolph Richardson. Remember, the word Randolph is spelled with an F. I'm also going to be starting a call-in program, an atheism call-in program with Neil, the 604 Atheist. We'll be equal co-hosts. And the website for that is www.truenorthtalk.ca, which also has a link to the YouTube channel. So thank you very much for having us on here, Tart, Oz, and Jeff, and everybody else. Mike, thanks.
Absolutely.
Great to see you, Zach. It was a pleasure.
And I'm excited for that call-in show, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Great.
And shout out to Neil, the 604 Atheist, real quick. We have three of our part of our the TART community that are going to be on his show here in the next 2 or 3 weeks, coming up, sharing their deconstruction and deconversion stories. So shout out to Neil and his fake long hair. Zach, where does everybody find you?
For that.
Thank you again, Oz and Jeff, for hosting Randolph Debating. It's been a lot of fun. You can find me at Adherent Apologetics. There's a link down below to the YouTube channel. Maybe someone can put it in the chat. That's great. And Adherent Apologetics is just like a show where I interview philosophers or theologians, all kinds of stuff. I'm actually talking with a theologian on Monday about dark passages in the Bible and like things like the flood and the atonement and stuff like that. Like, why would God have this happen? We just talk about with all kinds of different things. Like next week, we're talking about dark passages in the Bible, to mystic teleological arguments, medieval Christian mysticism, and a debate on God's existence. So all kinds of fun stuff at Adherent Apologetics. You can subscribe to us on YouTube or on a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. So if you can do that on your way out, that'd be appreciated. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, Zach. And I know, Zach, you said something about where somebody's from.
I'm from Central Pennsylvania. I saw that. So like State College, Penn State area. So yeah.
From the PA.
From the PA.
All right, so I'm just going to dox everybody on the screen. No, I'm kidding.
Tough.
But no, thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of the debate tonight. Great conversation, and again, Zach, thank you for being prepared, and you came in like a boss tonight. And Randolph was a boss in his own right. Zach,
don't disrespect Randolph. He's a pretty smart guy with a nice Canadian accent and a good mustache and a lot of intelligence. So
I was just going to say I respect Randolph. I respect the hell of that man and his humility and the way he approaches these discussions. But it is what it is, and we're the Atheist Roundtable. We always want to make sure when people come on, we're going to call it down the middle. We're going to be fair, even as atheists. If it hurts us to say it, we're going to say if the better argumentation was presented by the theist, we're going to say that.
It doesn't hurt.
Yeah, and Randolph has told me that even in private chat. Like if there's something that you see that can be critiqued to be better, I want to know it. So I know I can do that. Be comfortable doing that because he wants to get better, and I love that. I wish more people had that approach. It was like, no, I want to get if it's a defeat, if it's an L, I'll take the L if it means I get to get better. So I love that. So Jeff, anything before we go from you, man?
Nope.
And Jeff has his own pre-recorded show coming up in case you missed that earlier. Tons of great shit coming. But
we're going to be talking in our first episode about Ron Watt.
Ooh.
And all of his claims. Jesus blood, nails, Ark of the Covenant. They found Noah's Ark. All that stuff.
Isn't Noah's Ark in Kentucky?
Not that one. Not the one that leaks. with dinosaurs on it.
Well, that one's paid for by taxpayers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, everybody in the chat that's hung out with us, thank you. This is the Atheist Roundtable debate night, and we're out.
Welcome to Let's Get It, the Atheist Roundtable.
That was terrible. Let's do that again.
How's the mic? What you doing? What up with Eddie? Why he sweaty on your noodle? I don't get it. He lost his shit. The whole kid caboodle. Now pause. You pause. Everybody tell him that he's a lost cause. Who's the ass in the hat? Half Christian ass. Always talking this and talking that. And Benji on the epistemology. You got claims, got beliefs. What's your confidence? And is it relevant? Nah. Just Jeff. What's next? What text you gonna put to the test? Put to the test, little troll face weasel on TikTok looking like a beetle juice. And what do you do when a member of your crew sits in a shed with the dead? I don't know what's up. Anybody seen he jump? Now the newest member of the crew, the TART debut. Here's your preview. It's K Nabs. She says she's the live stream queen. Welcome to the team. Yeah. Welcome to the team.
The Atheist Roundtable.
Is faith a reliable pathway to truth?
Hey, yo, Oz, are we going on a deep dive?
Faith is bullshit. Jesus in the morning.